Good morning, everyone. If nothing else, we're going to be prompt. It's right at 9 o'clock sharp. And thank you, everybody, for coming this morning. I know everybody's busy. We'll try to get right at business. Fairly long agenda, only 2 action items today, but lots of good information to go out today, so keep your pens ready. We do have an agenda. Do have a quorum. Pardon me. We'll start with introductions. I'm Norm Steen, Teller County Commissioner, and your chair, Jill.
Jill Gabler, Colorado Springs.
Look, let's go this way. Then we are.
I'm not used to the red. This is fancy.
Mark Waller, El Paso County.
Andy Gunning, Executive Director, PPACG.
Don Wilson, Mayor, County Monument. Stan Vanderwerf, El Paso County Commissioner, and I'm not sure the mic's working.
Dick Ellsner, Park County Commissioner.
Terry Storm, Military Affairs Council, also Chamber of EDC.
ATK, Airport Academy. Edward Gallagher, Streeter Airport.
Eric Dormy, representing 21st Space Marine Troops Air Force Base.
Hal Walder, Fort Carson. Tim Geray, Mayor of Manatee Springs.
Tyler Stevens, Green Mountain Falls.
Turner Smith, Trustee, Raymond.
Paul Sonnier, Councilman, Woodland Park.
Andy Pigo, Council, City, Colorado Springs.
Yolanda Avila, Council Member, City, Colorado Springs.
And maybe I could just mention our new microphone system. Press the red button in the middle. That's the voice symbol. You'll see the red indicator coming on here. I understand that technology allows us to do up to 8 at a time. So if you're finished speaking, turn your microphone off and let the next person speak. Good morning, Mayor, and go ahead and introduce yourself.
Neil Levy, Woodland Park Mayor. Sorry I'm late.
Right. Good. We do have one agenda item addition since the minutes or the board packet went out electronically, and that's item 6E. You'll see that as the it's a strategic plan process update. With that addition, I'd look for a motion to accept the agenda.
Second.
Motion from Commissioner Ellsner and a second from Councilman Pico. All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Public comments for items not on the agenda. Open the floor for members of the audience or members of the board for comments not areas for topics not on the agenda. Seeing none, we'll move on to item 4, consent items. Is there any item that any board member would like to remove for separate consideration? Yes, Trustee Smith.
Item 4B, drug-free workplace. When I was reading through that, it looked like there was one item there, one that it did not read smoothly. And then my other concern is that I wanted to make sure that if an employee came forward of their own accord and came to their supervisor or perhaps the executive director or whatever, and came forward with, say they had an opioid addiction or something, that they could enter a drug treatment plan and stay within that plan, complete that plan per se, and upon finishing that plan, return to work. Now, I understand that they can't be operating on federal contracts, perhaps, if they're using and that type of thing. But I would like to see some way for employees to retain their position rather than simply being dismissed.
Okay, Barb Watson at the podium. You want to have any comments, Barb?
We're on. Toward the end, I reviewed this and probably can't find it now, but it is on a case-by-case basis, and it is just not dismissal. It is reviewing each case to determine what the severity of it is, but it's all sorts of discipline action from from written reprimand, verbal reprimand, including termination. However, the employee would have to enter into a dialogue with the executive director and management. That would include the supervisor of the employee.
And there is an option that the employee could retain their position. Maybe there's disciplinary action involved and rehabilitation services, but it's not an automatic dismissal, I don't believe, from my reading of it.
It's under E1.
Okay.
And so there was some language added at the recommendation of Employers Council, and that is the underlined portion of it. It's on page 4.
Okay, I believe it under section 8 maybe or something. Let me flip over to that. I'm trying to find out. When I was trying to read through that, and it was late, I admit,
Section 2B also talks about discipline. So it's just a reference, discipline actions will be imposed. And then it's more fleshed out in E1. Discipline actions can range from counseling to immediate termination. So it's on a case-by-case basis.
And I think the very last page, page 6, section 6, has 2 items there for an employee to basically self-report.
That has to do with over-the-counter drugs.
Correct. I'm referring now to the opioid prescription
Right.
drugs, which the employee feels that he's no longer in control of.
okay.
The question, trustee, is whether you believe that the policy adequately addresses your concern.
All right.
Thank you. Okay.
That's good.
Mr. Chair, I have one other item on that.
All right.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you. Commissioner?
Thank you. It is 4C. This is the tip administrative change for the rockfall from CDOT up Highway 24. I support the project. It needs to be done. It's a public safety issue, but it did come in more than 10% from the original estimate, and they're requesting that difference in dollars. So a little bit of this, my question is, just to make sure I understand what our procedures are when we have these kinds of changes in costs and how we adjudicate those and get them into these projects. And then the other one is I just want to hear from CDOT that they did their diligence to do the best to get to the right price.
Okay, anybody from CDOT want to address that to that point? John, probably not your...
I was asking Wendy if someone from CDOT, is it John? Or
John Leosados, John Hall, Wendy Pettit. Where would this specifically, for example, line up with the NOPE policy previously used by this board? Yeah. Wendy?
Wendy Pettit, CDOT Region 2. I was not involved in the bidding process for this project, but this is not the first time that we have had a project come in that is high, that we bring it back as an administrative amendment to award it. So in order to have picked a contractor to award it to, due diligence would have had to have been done to pick that final contractor, either by price or by the fact that there was some specialty that they were able to bring to the project. So with that being said, I mean, if we don't award the extra funding, then the project will get pulled completely from the corridor.
Okay.
We can't do half of what needs to be done from a safety perspective, so that's kind of where that stands. And I don't know the details, and I don't know that you have any information to know what the details are.
Well, so yeah, let me just make sure, because I was just looking at my phone real quick. So the Rockfall project we're talking about, right?
That's right.
Right.
So, yeah, so that is CDOT, our geotech funding that should be funding that project anyways. I don't
Right.
think that's the funding.
Asset management.
Yeah, it's our asset management funding. So they've reviewed That went through a low bid process and all, so it shouldn't affect any of the total funding within PPACG either.
Correct.
Because it's that asset management funding for rockfall mitigation.
That is an excellent answer.
And in the end, it may affect someone else's project because the pot has been deleted for the extra funding that needed to go into this corridor, but at least your project is whole and moving forward.
Okay, so I think that probably assists in answering the other part of the question with regard to what's our own procedures when we have overruns or, you have projected costs and then you get into contract pricing, and do we have a threshold above which, we perhaps take different approaches, or do we have different behavior patterns in this board because it might be either CDOT money or our money? And I am interested. If that isn't something that we can do in this board, I can, maybe it's for my own edification, and I can just talk to some of the staff about that afterwards, but I am interested in understanding it.
Our new transportation director, John Leos Sados, many of you have met, but if you may not have, might be able to address this briefly.
I might, but maybe not. Mr. Chair, members of the committee, my understanding, and again, I'm relatively new, is our tip is basically the federal funds that flow through the region. So as such, those federal funds are limited to what the amount that has been apportioned to the region are, that come either directly from the feds that flow through the state, but only sort of briefly, or those funds that come through the state and then are apportioned to us. If we have a project that is over, that is running through that CDOT process, just like this rockfall, if another body, in this particular case, I think it was the State of Colorado Transportation Board, says we're going to provide that funding, in this case it was the rockfall geotechnic thing, that means the project's already been funded outside of our pot of funds. That can be an administrative amendment, so then we can move forward. If it is a project within our own pot, where a project comes in and says, we no longer have those funds, there is no administrative amendment for us to automatically give funds. In fact, because we're in a use it or lose it situation with our federal dollars, we have programmed all of our funds. So to give one project $1 more, that means it's got to come off of another project. And so we can't just administratively, I can't just take money from one jurisdiction and give it to another. And if I could, I wouldn't last in this job very long. All of those actions have to come through the board. All tip changes like that have to come through the board. We as staff are not authorized to give any dollars back and forth administratively. So I think that answered the question. To see if Ken has given me kind of a, I got a nod. So I believe I got that correct. So hopefully that answers your question.
Okay, thank you. So I think it's, if it's any change in dollars, even if it's small, it does have to come to the board for a vote.
Well, because we are amending the tip, but the difference is this is an outside money addition, $369K, $364K, addition from CDOT administratively added to the Pikes Peak Area Council of Governments tip. So
Okay.
appropriate action would be to say thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate the answers to the questions. I'm good.
And because it has to be added to your tip before we can proceed with the project,
Rocky sits over there smiling.
there's no way around that whole process, because FHWA will go back and look at your tip, and they look at that page and they say, it's not there, CDOT, why not? So we have checks and balances to make sure that all the money that's being spent in your area winds up back in your tip.
Okay, thank you.
Address your question adequately? Okay, so we've looked at item B and C. Any other items to pull off for separate discussion? Seeing none, we have a motion to accept the consent items.
Second.
Motion by Trustee Smith, a second by Mayor Levy. All those in favor, aye. Aye. Thank you. Approved. Action items. Item 5A, membership appointment and reappointment for the CAC and TAC. Who's taking this issue? Jessica McMullen.
Thank you all very much. And you'll have noticed that your agenda item actually was missing the proposed motion. section of your agenda item. So the proposed motion would be to accept the Green Mountain Falls appointment of Ann Esch to the PPACG CAC, the appointment of Courtney Stone, at-large member, to the PPACG CAC, and the Manitou appointment of Shelley Cobot to the TAC, with alternates Taylor Gortz and Michelle Anthony.
Move
Does
approval.
anyone have any questions?
Second, any further discussion?
I'm sorry, any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Thank you to those governments for adding those members. Item 5B, Bravo, Area Agency on Aging Funding Recommendations 2018 and 2019. Mr. Urban.
Joe Urban, Area Agency on Aging. We'd like to give you kind of a brief explanation of our process for our funding. You have the information in your package. You have the spreadsheet of the recommended awards as well as a memo. This is a pretty thorough process. We spend about 8.5 weeks with a subcommittee of the RAC called the Technical Review Subcommittee that looks at all the proposals in depth. They spend 40 to 50 hours each looking at those, looking at all the variables that are included there. We know that last year was a very challenging year. This year doesn't look to be quite as challenging. We did find out, however, yesterday that we're going to receive our federal and state funding in two separate pots. Once again, the feds were not able to get that money out to us on schedule, so we will get an allocation letter for state funding and federal funding. We based this particular budget on last year's funding, knowing that there's a high probability we will get more money than that. The state of Colorado has approved an extra $4 million statewide for senior services, and the apportionment funding formula on the federal level was adjusted slightly to give us a little bit more. As many of you know, Colorado has kind of been on the short end of the stick as far as federal funding because we're a rapidly growing senior population, whereas other folks are not. And unfortunately, the chairs of those committees are from a lot of those Rust Belt states. We should be getting most of that funding in fairly rapid order. We have already got our state letter. We will get the federal letter hopefully by the end of July. So we'll operate on state funds for the month of July. A lot of those funds are siloed, so when you look at that spreadsheet, you'll see certain programs that get perhaps 100% of the funding because they are the only program within that part, that federal part, that's allowed to get that funding. And then we put particular attention this year on new programs. We did not want any of the new programs to go unfunded as they did last year, so we gave at least partial funding to all the new programs of merit. And consequently, at the end, when we got to the end of the pot, there wasn't a lot of money left for PPACG programs, so we were down about $120K roughly for internal programs. We will recoup that at the October reallocation of the extra money. So all that extra money that we anticipate coming in will be allocated in October rather than right now because we don't have it in the bank yet. And I always say Casey doesn't let me spend money that I don't have yet. Yeah, she's tough like that. Yes, Commissioner Littleton.
Just out of curiosity, Joe, on the Ombudsman program, it's on the page 2, kind of middle of the area. It has about $260-something thousand allocated for that. Is that just for salaries for the Ombudsman, or what?
That's predominantly salaries.
Okay, and how many Ombudsmen?
There's also, as you can imagine, some fairly significant travel expenses. They have a little over 100 properties in a 3-county area, so they do quite a bit of traveling.
Okay.
I'm sorry, I didn't catch that.
How many staff members is that for?
It's 3.5.
3.5. Okay. All right, sounds good. And I just wanted to, while I have the floor for 1 second, I just wanted to thank Joe. Joe works pretty collaboratively with our Department of Human Services. Anytime I have a constituent who has a concern, I get in touch with Joe, and he's usually able to help rectify and solve that issue or that concern for that citizen. So thanks, Joe.
Absolutely.
So, Joe, just doing a little math, you mentioned last Friday at our work session that we get about 11.8% of the statewide total allocation.
11.5.
11.5, okay, so my math a little bit off, but 11.5% of $4 million would add about $470,000 to the total allocation. Or so?
That's correct, and then we anticipate probably about another roughly $200,000 from the change in the national formula, federal formula.
Okay.
So it could be a fairly substantial amount of money for us to allocate.
Yeah. So the current recommended distribution today fills about 82% of the needs that have been requested.
Correct.
And this would add another 9% or so. So
we'd be edging up towards full funding with that
a little over
secondary
93% of total requests. So it's good news.
It's good news. It's a good year,
Okay.
as opposed to last year.
Yeah. So questions for Mr. Urban on the distribution or the process? Yes, Sharon. Councilmember Thompson.
Sorry. Okay, on the second page where it's under Pikes Peak area aging, there's $168,000, whereas in the 2017 budget for the counseling, there was zero.
That was a result of a change in the way that we were coding some of our services. We had been using education as a component for a lot of the individual one-on-one counseling, and we made a change mid-year to try to get more towards the classic definition of counseling, which is one-on-one, versus education, which is class setting. Our Medicare classes, our Social Security classes, all those things are considered education. So it's just a structural change. The money stayed the same. We just moved it from one pot to another.
And then the reallocation money that is coming possibly in October, how do you go back and reallocate that, or do they have to go back and reapply? You know, for example, if they act for $50,000 and only got 35, you know.
We do a mini RFP process. So instead of a 8-week, 3-meeting, 40-hour process, it's condensed down to about a week and a half. And they do a mini RFP, single sheet RFP, and then we review based on the indicators they gave us originally, but also based on, by that point, we have some history as far as how much need there is and how they're spending that money.
And so everybody who's on this list would get notification of that? They'd get notification of it and then have time to apply? Okay,
yes.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Other questions or comments for Joe? All right.
So our request today would be to approve the recommendation of the RAC to forward this budget.
Good.
I'd like to move approval.
Okay. A motion from Commissioner Littleton.
Second.
Second from Commissioner Levy. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Okay. Did I say Commissioner? It's okay. All right.
You get paid more. Paid a lot more.
All right. Great. That's it for action items. We'll go on to information items. Item 6A, small area forecast update. Jennifer, good morning.
All right.
Okay, good morning. Jennifer Valentine. I'm a transportation planner with PPACG. So I'm here to give you an update on the small area forecast. This is just an information item today, but it's a pretty hefty one, so please bear with me as I try to move through all of this material for you. Okay, so I know some of you were around for the last long-range transportation plan and may have been through the small area forecast process, and others were not, so I'm just going to try to give a little bit of context here. So the Colorado State Demographer develops a forecast for population and jobs for each county in Colorado between now and our forecast year of 2045. So we know how many people and how many jobs are going to be in our study area, which is El Paso and Teller counties, for the small area forecast through 2045. What we don't know is exactly where those people and jobs will be located. So we use our land use model, which is called Urban Sim, to spatially allocate or distribute those people and jobs throughout our study area. Doing this type of land use modeling is a federal requirement, but it also just makes a lot of sense. We're trying to figure out the need for future transportation investments in our region, so we need to know where people are coming from, where they're going, where they're living, where they're working. So that's really the foundation of this exercise. So how's it used? We get this question a lot. So the first thing we'll do is we'll use, when we get approval of the forecast, we'll use that information to help score all of the candidate projects that will eventually go into the 2045 long-range transportation plan. We will be scoring projects under all three of the land use scenarios that the board approved several months ago, so the infill, the new centers, and the dispersed development. After the forecast is complete, we'll also be doing a sort of a report and a summary sheet that sort of weighs the efficiencies and relative merits of the 3 different land use scenarios, just kind of as a piece of information for people to have. We can look at things like travel time, land consumption, water use, just depends on what everyone wants to see. And then finally, we've been having some conversations about doing some smaller area studies. We do get output from UrbanSim about income, race, age, so we can use that information to look at, to help provide input for comprehensive plan updates or just other types of small area studies. So an overview of the process. We did spend quite a bit of time at the beginning, really more than just November and December, just getting to know the model, working on the inputs, doing quality checks of the data that was going into the model, and working with each of our member governments on those inputs, underlying zoning, development projects, all the things that the model needs to run. By February of this year, we were ready to start sharing those results. We reached out to land use planners from each of our member governments to get their input on what's going on in each specific area, because they really have the best feel for that. Incorporated their feedback, and then we shared the model output with a small team of regional economic experts. So we wanted them to look at model output from a regional perspective, make sure things were making sense, but also look at our methodology and assumptions and make sure those were solid. Incorporated their feedback, and then in April we took draft results to our transportation and community advisory committees. They've each seen draft results twice now, so April and May. We did receive a decent amount of feedback, especially at the first meeting in April, incorporated all of that, and here we are in June. So you're receiving this as an information item today. We're taking it to the TAC and the CAC later this month as an action item. If we receive recommendations, you'll see it again next month, hopefully for action here. Okay, so many of you were involved in our scenario planning workshop we actually held in this room almost exactly a year ago. We had tables set up with pizzas where you built different scenarios. Laughter, some of you must have been here. So we did develop those 3 land use scenarios conceptually, so the infill, the new centers, and dispersed development. After we had the workshop, we went out to 6 different events across the community. We were at the El Paso County Fair, we were at farmers markets, just to get additional public input on those scenarios. So then we had these 3 conceptual land use scenarios, these ideas that we had to make a reality within the land use model UrbanSim. And we had a few different tools to do that I'll briefly touch on here in a minute. So just a refresher, infill was defined as new development is concentrated in already developed areas, and we purposely left that a little bit broad, and I'll talk more about that in a minute also. So new centers was those already developed areas remain stable. We're not wiping out our existing cities and towns and county activity centers, but we also see new activity centers or new nodes of activity emerge. And then dispersed development is where, again, those existing activity centers remain stable, but new development is in a more dispersed kind of pattern. So the infill scenario within the model. So like I said, we had a couple of different tools available to try to create 3 distinct scenarios within UrbanSim. So I gave a much, much longer, more detailed presentation to the CAC and the TAC and the CAC, and all of that information is in attachment 1 in your packet if you really want to get into it. But for now, basically, under the infill scenario, we prioritized or incentivized development in specific zone districts. So we looked at high-density residential, downtown, mixed use, and then there were a couple of subsets within Colorado Springs and Manitou Springs that are already experiencing some much higher densities. So we also, our second tool was we developed a mask, and I'll show it to you here in a second. It was another way to incentivize or prioritize development in specific areas over others. It was kind of an evolution, but eventually we ended up deciding to use, if you recall, the 2015 population and employment boundary that was developed as part of our goals, objectives, targets. We had the infill objective and target, and we had to decide how we collectively wanted to define infill. And we ended up using the metric of 1,000 people and/or jobs per square mile. So it's a pretty neat little cutoff of what is and is not considered infill. So this is actually the inverse of the map we developed. So if you recall, we had this kind of core area that's essentially a lot of the city of Colorado Springs boundary, but it also extends out. Schriever Air Force Base was included because it's clearly a population center, portions of Falcon, up Highway 24 to Woodland Park. And then we also added the connecting infrastructure. That was a big conversation we had. Those roadways leading out to Schriever, leading up to Falcon, for example. So the way the mask works is that any part of this you can see through. You can see down to the aerial photography that's not this light blue color. That's a mask hole. Anything that's light blue is under the mask. So anything that's the mask hole, that's the area where under infill, one of our 3 scenarios, development is being incentivized or prioritized in some way. That's just another way to look at it, if you prefer the crosshatch. So under the new center scenario, again, we have zoning and the mask. So we prioritize slightly different zone districts. So this is kind of a link to a policy decision. A city, a county, a town could decide that they want to upzone a specific district. So maybe high-density residential, maybe currently it's 9 houses are allowed per acre. Maybe in the future that's going to be 15 if they want to allow for more density. So it was kind of a scenario planning what-if exercise. So for new centers, we prioritized high-density residential, mixed use, and PUD is planned unit development, and that's often what areas are zoned when they're about to receive a big subdivision or shopping center. So it makes sense for a new center. So we also developed a mask for new centers. It's probably easier just to skip to the mask. So the area includes, the whole includes everything that was under the infill mask and more. So we have additional area opened up, certainly in the security wide field area. There's more of a hole in Fountain. Black Forest has a little bit more of a hole. And then we also see some areas that are holes that are not contiguous with the main blob. So, we see Callahan, Peyton. I think there's additional area around Woodland Park, Cripple Creek, for example. So that just gives the model the opportunity to develop those new activity centers. So, for example, there's been talk of a, Ellicott Town Center. Maybe that's going to take off in the future. So there's a hole there for it. Okay, and then finally, the dispersed scenario is definitely the simplest one. We assume that current zoning classifications, so current densities remain into the future. There's no sort of policy changes, and there's no mask that incentivizes or disincentivizes development in specific areas. So it's kind of like the trends continue scenario. Okay, I just want to touch on a couple more tools we have and used within the model to develop these scenarios and for our baseline data. So I personally entered 172 development projects into the model. Those include major developments in the last couple of years, things that are being constructed today, and things that are in the pipeline that are pretty much going to happen. They've been approved or they're a pretty sure thing. So the reason we do that is because we want the model to have the best possible information about what's on the ground today, so our base year data, as well as a trajectory for the next 5 to 10 years. So that really gives the model a good feel for what's happening, and so it can extrapolate that into the future out to 2045. Okay, so we also use something called constraints. So these are areas like floodplain, steep slopes. We also look at military influence areas and land that's owned by National Park Service, U.S. Forest Service, that are not likely to receive the same types of development as your regular vacant land. And then finally, we use adjustments, mostly for our military installations. We do not ask our land use model to try to predict the types of growth that are going to happen on our military installations. We work directly with them and planners on each installation, and they tell us what they think is going to happen in terms of growth in the coming years. The main thing we want to do is make sure we have really solid numbers for what's there right now. We didn't get a lot of forecasts about what's going to happen in the future. Okay, so in addition to the process I outlined at the beginning about how we collaborated with, especially the land use planners from our member governments, I wanted to highlight how we've been working with our committees over the last couple of months. So as I mentioned, we did get a decent amount of feedback kind of between April and May that we incorporated. The May meeting was pretty quiet, which was a little bit scary, but we just assumed everyone was really happy. So we also received some written comments from El Paso County staff, and we've had obviously a number of meetings with different City of Colorado Springs staff that we responded to in different ways. So one of our main lines of defense is to make sure that we have all of those development projects in the model, so we added a few more. We refined both of the masks, so the infill and the new centers mask. We changed those underlying zoning assumptions. And so we also produced an additional series of maps. So this month, we just gave you a link to download all of the maps for review. Apologies for that. You will have the full set in your packet next month. It was just a lot of maps, and so I was told it was too many color copies for an information item. But you'll have them all in your packet this month, and you can certainly start looking at them if you want to go to Dropbox and just download those PDFs. We don't anticipate any major changes happening if you want to go ahead and dig in. And then we did share a lot of different file types. We produced maps as PDFs. We produced KMZs, which can be opened interactively in Google Earth. We shared shapefiles if you want to do things in GIS. And then we also shared CSVs or spreadsheets with the TAC and the CAC. There's thousands of lines of data. Again, if people really want to dig in, we want to be very transparent about the output. And we were able to share those with the TAC almost 3 weeks, actually, in advance of their meeting, which is coming up next week. Okay, so at this point, I want to switch over. These are the same maps that you have links to in your memo, but I do want to flip through them quickly and just point out a couple of things that should help with your review. So we have two different ways of looking at the data that we settled on. The first is these change maps. So anything that's green on the map is an area where this zone or this TAS gained, in this case, jobs. We have a separate set for population. Anything that's blue, there was a loss. So we have enough growth coming in our region that we didn't see a lot of losses in terms of the number of TASs. Some of these TASs are really big, so you see a big blue blob, but it may only be like 6 jobs or 20 jobs or something. We're not seeing huge losses, especially with population. So this series of maps is kind of neat because you can compare what's happening with the 3 scenarios. So dispersed jobs, you see pretty widespread growth, a lot of green. Then when you look at infill, it's kind of what you would expect based on the way that mask looked. The green area is much more condensed, so I kind of just like to flip back and forth. Dispersed, infill, pretty obvious difference with that one. But again, you don't see a lot more loss. You just see more of this gray, which is the kind of no change. Things are looking pretty stable. So the new centers scenario is kind of in between the other two. You see sort of more growth in the northern section of the region, maybe a little bit more in the southern section. So less widespread than dispersed, much more widespread than infill. It's kind of the takeaway. So we also did this series that zooms in because otherwise you cannot see the TASs within downtown Colorado Springs. So the pink boundary is the city of Colorado Springs, so it extends just beyond that. And you can see kind of a similar pattern. So dispersed, infill, new centers. And the downtown area gets more interesting in the next set of maps. So then we look at residential units. It's kind of an interesting difference. The downtown and core area of the city of Colorado Springs is much more stable. There's a lot of existing residential neighborhoods that we're not seeing gains or losses. And then you see under this dispersed scenario, you see a lot of growth in outlying areas. So infill, less so. You don't see as much growth in kind of the really outlying areas of the study area. And then new centers, a little bit fuzzy, you know, it's sort of different areas, but it's not quite as clear as the jobs change. So then again, we have the zoomed in series, dispersed, infill, you can see more of a difference there. You're definitely seeing more residential growth within the city of Colorado Springs under infill, which is, again, what you would expect with the mask, and then new centers, a little bit less. Okay, so then the second, and I promise final, series of maps looks at densities. So this one's a little hard to see from far away, but you'll still see the trends. So basically the dark green is pretty low density. So we're looking here at less than 2 jobs per acre. As the colors get brighter, you move to the blues and the yellows and the pinks and the reds, you get higher density. So this really compares within a scenario how growth is happening between 2015, 2030, and 2045. So I'll zoom in here in a second, but basically you can just see things starting to spread a little bit. So infill, dispersed, or sorry, this is all dispersed. So 2015, 2030, and 2045. And this is jobs. So here's the zoomed in version. If you kind of keep your eye on downtown, it's not very dramatic under dispersed, but it will be under infill. So you can, so infill, sorry, I'm stuck on that. 2015, 2030, 2045. You see things get a lot sort of brighter, more red, more pink, more yellow. And you can really see the corridors where the growth is happening too. You can look at, you'll be able to see it better on your computer if you choose to pull it up, but you can see the growth happening kind of along Academy, along Powers, along a lot of our major transportation corridors in addition to downtown. So now if we look at residential units per acre or housing density, so we have 2015, 2030, and 2045. We definitely see pretty concentrated areas of growth. So this is our favorite TAS right here. This is the northern section of Banning Lewis Ranch. You also see quite a bit of residential growth down in Fountain, which we all know is happening already. And then there's a couple of other TASs sort of between 24 and Powers, sort of near Woodman. There's a lot of growth happening there as well. And then again, the zoomed in version, 15, 30, and 45, you see those same TASs popping. Okay, infill. So infill jobs. This one's not very exciting, so I'm going to skip to. Okay, so the zoomed in version, 2015 infill. So if you keep your eye on downtown, this is where we really start seeing some, bam. So 15, 30, and 45. So just for context, because you probably can't see it, the red is more than 100 jobs per acre. So. What is what red blob? Not sure. That's really so. Yeah, so what we've zoomed in on here is kind of the DDA area, so it's a specific extent that Colorado Springs uses for planning. So that's really most of downtown that you see in that red. So it's really not just 1 or 2 TASs in terms of the types of jobs. We do have output about job sectors, but we didn't really have a chance to dig into that this time around. It gets pretty detailed. Okay, so infill residential units. So there's kind of a common theme with especially the residential units because we had so many development projects that were entered into the model. We have a really clear trajectory. It's pretty clear that that northern section of Banning Lewis is going to develop under all 3 scenarios. It's already happening. So we don't see as dramatic of a difference with the residential units as we do with the jobs. And so then 2015 infill, 2030, and 2045. And then finally, new centers. And so with jobs under all 3 scenarios, we really see a lot of growth in that sort of northern Colorado Springs area, Research Parkway, Interquest, Briargate, sort of just east of I-25, east of the USAFA area. And then finally, the zoom-in map with jobs. You don't see downtown get quite as red under this scenario, but you do see some of the bright colors pop up. Still see a lot of that growth in the northern Colorado Springs area. And then finally, new centers, residential units. Again, this is kind of the hybrid scenario. we don't see this northern Banning Lewis TAS get quite as bright under this scenario as we do under dispersed, I believe. And then again, just seeing a lot of that growth happening here, and definitely some in southern Colorado Springs and Fountain as well. So that's all I have at this point. I just wanted to point out a few things in the maps. Again, if you want to dig in more, you have everything you need in your packet.
Yeah. But, the big question for me is, why does this matter? Well, it matters because this study, this background information will determine how we prioritize different projects, which ones serve the high-growth areas. I don't know if you can get to what degree of confidence these numbers are close, but if you talk about adding 200 new jobs downtown, that's 200 more vehicles, perhaps, or some other alternatives to getting those people downtown to that workplace. So this stuff does matter. Andy?
Yeah, just a quick technical question. You mentioned in there a number of the files were KMZ files and stuff. Do you have those where we can download them and play with them ourselves?
Yes, so there are links, if you look at the electronic version of your packet,
Right.
there are links to download all of those files. And the KMZ is all one, so within that you'll have what are called KMLs, so the different
Right.
layers for each scenario. So you'll be able to look at basically everything you saw here in an interactive format.
Yeah.
Super, thanks.
That's a really good point. If you are a member of Pikes Peak Area Council of Governments, this is your data. You should dive into this, pull this home, give it to your own transportation planners, use it in your analyses of different infill and permitting and land use policies. So this is yours. Take it home, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't know if you can hear that or not, but so just a couple of quick questions. One of the things we've heard, obviously, in these press articles recently about by 2050, the size of population in our region, and I think it's somewhere in the area of 1 million or more or 1.2 million or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
So with regard to the modeling that you did here, you're modeling out to 2045. It's a 5-year difference from what we've seen in these press articles. But where are you from a total population prediction, or what number did you use to generate predictions in the 24-45 timeframe? What I'm trying to do is, at the end state, at the most future year, you more or less correlated to what the predictions are from these press articles that we've seen.
Sure. So that's why we use a control total that's based on the Colorado State Demographer's forecast. So every single year that the model runs, it respects that control total. So if the state demographer says we're at 1.1 million in 2045, which is what she says, that's what the model output. It matches it to the number.
Okay, great. So you're taking those demographics that you're getting from the state and you're modeling to that.
Yes.
And then, of course, we do have other things that are kind of important considerations for us. And the most obvious, most glaring one is 3 lanes or 4 lanes on I-25, right? Mm-hmm. So I'm interested in knowing. You mentioned in the documentation here that this can help us drive kind of infrastructure sizing. So I'm interested in whether we have any output, or if you intend to generate any output about 3 versus 4 lanes for I-25. There could be several other things, like whether 24 going west of the Springs needs to be widened or whatever, but I'm kind of interested if there's going to be any predictions about that, and maybe the timing for that. And I just don't know if UrbanSim is sophisticated enough to get to that kind of data.
Yeah, so one thing we do, basically the last step with UrbanSim, is we integrate it with our travel demand model. So we go back and forth in 5-year increments, make sure that the land use model and the transportation model are talking to each other. So for UrbanSim, how long it takes to get between areas has an influence on how attractive that area is for development, and how much development is in the area has an influence on Ken's travel model of, sort of the demand for travel and how long travel takes. So I think the exercise about I-25 or 24 and those infrastructure needs would be a separate sort of post-processing exercise that we would do with the travel model, kind of like we do when we get candidate projects for the long-range plan, where we model what would be the impact of this project on the whole transportation network. So I imagine it would be possible to do something like that with I-25 or with 24, but it would be done in the travel model, not within UrbanSim.
Thank you very much. And with that in mind, perhaps there is a plan then to, after this research is concluded, to place that into the travel model and generate output, and I think that would be very interesting to see those numbers as well. Is that on the docket to do sometime this year, or what's the planning for that?
Yeah, we're definitely going to do that as part of the 2045 project, but I think some of these bigger picture transportation needs, there needs to be a lot of collaboration with CDOT. And actually, I think next month we may have an update from CDOT on some of the other bigger corridors that they're looking at long-term, where some of the transportation needs are evolving based on our population forecasts and other demographic changes. But we run a travel model within our 2045 long-range plan update. We have to coordinate that with the state. I don't know how much we're going to get into, say, I-25, since that is such a interregional, statewide asset, but we'll look at what the regional needs are in our arterials, collectors, and other major roadway system, look at what the future volumes might be, where we need to plan our future improvement projects that we can control as a body.
Great. And then as we go forward with that, I think you're probably intending on doing this, but to inform this board as to what those are starting to look like, because I do have a strong interest in kind of understanding, what our modeling seems to be driving with regard to infrastructure, and then not just about what that might mean with regard to widening or more bridges or whatever, but also the timing of it. What would make sense if we're going to try and get to these 1.2 million person figures and so forth. Is this something that is needed kind of sooner rather than later, or is it something that goes beyond, or even regionally, maybe some areas got to go fast and others don't? So to the point that we can kind of get to some of those predictions going forward and inform the board of those predictions, that'd be awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Good.
And just one other quick note, you may already know this, but there was a separate travel model that was developed just for the I-25 corridor that's a combination of the northern portion of our travel model and the southern portion of the DRCOG area. A consultant team developed a separate model for that purpose, since we each kind of stop at a specific line.
I'd be interested, too, is how prescriptive a travel plan can be into where people will move. In other words, which comes first, the people or the roads? If the roads come first, you can actually prescribe where people will go, because they will take the easiest exit, they'll build home with the nicest views, where the nice shopping centers are. So, as government policy, how do you, a lot of people smarter on this topic than me, obviously, but how well land use policy can prescribe where people should live, not where they do live.
Well, and it was very interesting to see the impact when we did do the travel model integration, because for our first few runs, we used one basically travel model skim that tells you how long it's going to take to get between different areas for the whole model. When we went back and forth and did the 5-year increments, we actually did see not drastic changes, but we did see changes in the output. So it was nice to know that there is an interaction between transportation and land use.
And not only that, where schools are built, I'm interested in what happens to housing prices when I-25 3 lanes opens up. Because now you've reduced the transactional cost between Denver and Colorado Springs. You made it easier for people to move between the two metros. How will that affect housing values? How will it affect school classroom sizes? Yes. Turner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You went right to where I was going, sir. I've been sitting here thinking about jobs and the effect that that's going to have on housing prices. We have a lot of water in Rama compared to what we have as far as customers. We're probably not the only one that have that situation. I'm just saying, I'm not trying to invite the whole neighborhood out there. But I'm saying housing costs in Denver are out of sight. Housing costs here, in my mind, are way too high. I don't want to offend anybody, but that's my opinion.
They
Okay.
ask for it because
I'm
they
sorry
can get it.
if I've offended someone in this room. But if you want jobs and business to come here, I would think that I don't think you can move backwards on housing costs. I think once I get to this level, I don't think you can move backwards, but trying to hold them where they are would be maybe a good start. I don't know how you do that. I don't have a script for that. But otherwise, people are going to, as maybe you unintendedly referred to, maybe they're going to drive to Fountain or somewhere else to live that costs less. And they're going to commute to a good job in downtown Colorado Springs or somewhere else. So let's think about this and see what we can do. And this sort of relates to another thing that we talked about at the retreat in just a little bit, and that is homelessness. People can get into a home, and then something happens, whether it be a family breakup or whatever, and all of a sudden, I heard a comment one time, we're all just, I don't know, so many weeks or months or something from the street. And so we want to keep this, I think, in sight as we move forward with this, and think about how can we keep affordable housing kind of on our back burner, if you will.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other comments, questions? Yes, Rocky.
Jennifer, you may have answered this question, if so, I apologize, but how does this work interact with the work that Eric Sabina is doing up at CDOT on their statewide model?
Well, I mean, the main interaction that I know of recently was what I just mentioned about that the consultant team developed. Oh, are you talking about the statewide model?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so I know I actually talked to Eric last week. I mean, I know they integrate for the travel model. I know they integrate the model from each of the MPOs, and then they have to do their own sort of magic to get all of the non-MPO areas into the model. I'm not sure what they're doing with land use modeling. I haven't heard that they're using Urban Sim or anything like that. Most of what I've heard has been about their travel model.
Yeah, it's informed by land use modeling, which I thought was coming from the COGS and the TPRs. So I'd like to make sure that conversation is a robust one.
Okay.
One of the issues the commission is very interested in is it Toyota that says they're only going to be building electric vehicles by 2025? So within the time frame of this modeling, there are going to be some robust changes in the impact of technology on traffic demand, which we've all read about. And I, for one, haven't seen, and probably because nobody knows, but how could those fundamental changes in technology and the way we get around impact our anticipated density models, time-of-day models, traffic volume models, all of that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so unfortunately, we're in the same boat as everyone else with the inability to model things like the impacts of autonomous vehicles. That's, if you go to any planning conference, that's what everyone's talking about, but nobody has an answer. That was a big topic of conversation in the development of our 3 land use scenarios. That's kind of what informed those 3, what we called storylines for the infill, new centers, and dispersed development. And when you actually get to the exercise of developing the land use model and the tools within the model, you get a little bit detached from that storyline. But at the end, we bring it full circle and wrap the storyline back in and say, that's kind of some of that post-processing of what are the efficiencies, how might infill interact with electric vehicles or autonomous vehicles. So that's the time when we bring everything back together.
If I may, one more comment. We're putting a lot of effort. In fact, there's some work that leads the nation in the intelligent highway systems, which is going to have a big impact on safety and traffic management and the like. I'm not sure how to build that into this model, because this model, I think, is one that's been progressing through a number of decades, as this is the way we do things. I'd suggest that maybe we want to have a side conversation that continues in parallel with this one about just put out some hypotheticals about what the impact of autonomous vehicles and others may have without necessarily going through, given that there's a high degree of uncertainty. How do you plan on uncertainty, right? I mean, it's a typical problem you deal with in many areas, but we are at the moment planning under an enormous amount of uncertainty. If there's a side conversation about that help us think about, maybe we not only are informed by those changes, but also could shape them. I think it'd be an interesting conversation to have.
And we've really emphasized the need to be firmly flexible in our transportation planning. And that's why we update our plan once every 4 years. But in between our plan updates, we have to take into consideration all the changes we're seeing from a technological standpoint, financial, and otherwise. So good points.
Good. Any other questions, comments on the topic? Yes, Yolanda.
I just have a comment. Jennifer came to the office with and gave this presentation, and she said she gave a similar presentation a year ago. I don't recall it at all. And so she brought over after that meeting, and I met with Tom as well. They were so great in explaining. I also had the question about what type of jobs were downtown, too. But she brought over these huge maps for me with contrast and colors. So I just want to thank you, Jennifer, for that presentation and how you went above and beyond to present that for me to understand a little bit more. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Happy to do it.
John.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, Jennifer, the job question, the demographer gives you the total number of jobs, and then that goes into the model. The model can make certain assumptions of what those are, but ultimately, it just, from the model's point of view, and this is a question, a job is just a job. What type of job that is, whether it's manufacturing or high-tech or whatever, has more to do with the policies you all implement in your roles as counselor or council people than what the model does. Is that correct?
Well, so we do have the ability, if we knew, for example, that a specific job sector was projected to grow faster than others, we could apply different growth rates to different job sectors. We internally don't have that information. I can't say, I think this job sector is going to take off in the next 20 years. If we had a reliable source of information, we could differentiate and see what would our region look like if we were more heavily tech or agriculture or mining or whatever. At this point, we just weren't able to do that.
Yeah. Andy.
So in short, all the estimates are wrong. Yeah.
That's the storyline.
No, I think your points are very well made. That we're just making assumptions based upon observed growth and projecting ahead based on our best guesses. And I think it's a tremendous tool that you have here. The precision of which, of course, is always open to discussion. But it's a great project. To talk about some of the lower or some of the areas in downtown, about half of that downtown area is essentially low-end empty buildings in a lot of cases. So, we're talking about just filling that in, and that's where the job growth is that the business sector downtown. But what those look like is anybody's guess.
Yeah. Good. Any other questions in? Seeing none. Oh, I'm sorry.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks. Okay. It's all right. I understand if you don't ever look to your left. So, just have to say, I wanted to thank you, Jennifer, for reaching out to Jennifer Irvin, our county planner, just to make sure that as we're moving forward with this, you know, that we're doing that cooperation and coordination rather than just looking at something going, gosh, this is the way PPACG wants to go, regardless of what the other, you know, specific entities want to do, that we have a strategic plan that moves forward together. Thanks so much.
And I have to say, county staff has had some of the most useful suggestions and insights, so we appreciate people's willingness to dig in and review this. I know not everyone is as excited about it as I am, so appreciate that review.
Awesome, Jennifer. Thank you very much. And I would encourage, send your transportation planners from your local governments up to make an appointment with Jennifer and get on her calendar. Is that fair?
Of course.
Yeah, there you go. She's more than willing to share. All right, move on then to item 6B, land use, joint land use study program update. Brian.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Brian Potts. I'm the Joint Land Use Study Program Manager. One thing I'll first note is that in reviewing this memo, those of you that are on the Joint Land Use Study Policy Committee may note that some things occurred since our meeting was on June 7th, and turning in this memo occurred prior to that meeting. So I will note those as I go through the content. Again, the Joint Land Use Study is a program that began in 2015. We were originally awarded a 2-year grant that was subsequently extended out to October 31st of this year. So we are in the final stretch of this program. We've had a ton of feedback from stakeholders, from military, community stakeholders, developers, community organizations, citizens throughout this process, and we've done a lot of research. Most recently, what we did is, a couple of things. One, we kept throughout this process getting referred to the joint land use studies that occurred down in San Antonio. With the Office of Economic Adjustment within the Department of Defense, who provides the funding for this project, had said, take a look at what they're doing as when you're looking to model some things in terms of how to structure our document. So after hearing this from multiple stakeholders, we thought on our way to the National Planning Conference, we would stop in San Antonio and meet with the folks that are actually doing that. Had a great meeting with the Alamo Area COG, which is San Antonio area. About 2.5 million people is within their COG area, so it is a large area. But they have 3 installations, including Joint Base Randolph, which is where the 306th, which is the flight training program that also operates flight training at the U.S. Air Force Academy. So there's some ties there. We learned a lot about implementation because they completed their plan in 2015. So as we're getting to this phase, we want to see how should we craft things, what are some lessons learned. We learned quite a few things there in being specific and making sure to outline some actions. And so we got a lot of good feedback, and this will be an ongoing conversation because they also want to learn from us. So that's going to be a good tie, and we think that we can learn a lot from each other in terms of how we sustain military mission in our area and thereby help sustain our economy. With that, we are at a point where we completed probably an 80 to 85% complete document. It's all text at this point, almost all text. We provided that to the military for legal review to make sure that we're meeting the military's regulations, using the correct terminology, all of that, making sure we're not, some of the recommendations coming through aren't anything that are there's a law against it for some reason, just to make sure. And with that, that was 95 pages of pure text. So when you think that we're going to be adding in tables, photos, some other content, this document is going to be fairly substantial, and that makes sense. It's 5 installations. Usually you do one joint land use study for one installation. So it's like we're doing 5 studies at once. With that, we're managing fine. With that, the next phase during the military legal review, and primary reason why I wanted to be here, is to let you know we're going to be having a few public input meetings. These are going to be, at this point, the first round is going to be around the Colorado Springs, El Paso County area. With that, further along in the document, we've listed the 3 locations that they're occurring in the final full week of this month. So Monday, June 25th, will be at Falcon High School. We expected that in Peyton. We expect that that'll be primarily Schriever and Peterson interests will show up there in terms of citizens. Tuesday, June 26th. All these times are 5:30 to 7 p.m., by the way. Discovery Canyon High School up on the north side of Colorado Springs, we expect will get a primarily contingent interested in U.S. Air Force Academy issues. And then the last meeting with Thursday, June 28th at Fountain Fire Station 1. We have since learned after preparing this memo that the fire station had moved a couple years ago. It's no longer at 212 North Santa Fe. It's actually at 811, but Google Maps has not, and some of the other resources have not yet updated that. It is correct on the Fountain website, though, so you guys are good there. Yes. So at each of these, we're going to be having our consultant, HB&A Architects and Tetra Tech and Lisa Bachman will be helping with staffing the stations. Our goals are that we can start to get some information to the public about what we've learned during this process. We can ask the public what role do they see in some of these issues with preserving or sustaining military mission and some of the shared community interests such as wildfire, stormwater, open space and trails, some of these mutual interests that are shared between the military on certain compatibility issues. After we conclude the public input meetings, actually I shouldn't say conclude these three. We are currently working with some of the county fairs that are going on in Teller County, Pueblo County, and Fremont County, because within those areas, the primary impacts that the community experiences is related to helicopter flight or maybe sound from artillery fire at Fort Carson, and therefore that audience, it's a little bit tougher to get in touch with them sometimes because they tend to be out in the countryside. So we thought the county fairs, talking with Norm Steen and some of the other contingents, we're going to try and attend those in July and August, set up a booth, and we believe we'll get some good citizen impact there for some of that demographic that may be experiencing overflight. Technical committee is going to be reviewing an initial set of strategies that have been drafted, and this, of course, is post the military review, so we can get a sense of where we're at with recommended strategies. That'll be on July 12th for the technical committee. They'll make a recommendation or say we need to make these changes. If they are recommended for approval, they'll go to the policy committee in early August, on August 2nd, and then they'll be considering those as well. With those strategies in place, we can then finalize some of the content for the full document review by technical and policy committee. And then once they've had a chance to weigh in on that, then we'll get it posted for public comment. So again, this schedule is ideal. There's some things that may shift depending on the outcomes of some of these reviews, but we have built in an extra about 8 weeks at the end of the project so that if there is a need for additional review, we have that. But we are tracking pretty well. And so far, we still have a little ways to go, but we're getting there. Again, we'll be coordinating in Fremont County and Pueblo County with those councils of governments as we do those meetings. Again, with a 4-county region, there's a lot of different pieces that are moving. At this point, that's all I have today, but I wanted to come to you and give you an update on what we're doing out in the community, that this is coming up, just so you're aware. Again, the dates will change, but we'll keep you informed. Do you have any questions or comments for me?
Questions for Ryan? I want to thank our military members for the establishing this as a project that's been close in collaboration, so I don't know if anybody from that end of the table have any comments on the general over process of the.
I'll tell you, we're tracking same. Looking forward to seeing the product and putting our 2 cents in. But it's been a great project. I've been lucky enough to be here for the entire thing, and it's been a great collaborative effort to make sure that we're taking care of our community as well as taking care of the missions that are coming to Peterson. So I appreciate it.
Yeah, and I'll note that throughout this process, both military, communities, all stakeholders, we've gotten some great participation, and the dialogue has been really good. And some of just the outgrowth of that dialogue that has created some conversations that have gone outside of this to deal with some ongoing issues. And I think it's been a really productive process thus far, even though we're not at a final product yet.
Yeah, no, I can see, having gone through some of these things over my career, sometimes it's not just the product. 95 pages that is the real Jim, it's the process you've been through, the relationship developed, the conversations that happen offline that are really is the payback, so.
Yeah, and it'll be not just the 95 pages,
Oh, no.
maybe 150 and possibly
Yeah.
200 pages of appendices. You never know. So,
okay.
Yeah.
Mr. Chair, if I could just mention, too, Brian and his team have really knocked it out of the park the past couple of months in getting to this point. Great collaboration with military installations, creatively came up with this way to engage with the folks in our peer group in San Antonio. Brian and his team, he and Ann Werner were here till 4 o'clock in the morning, week before last on a Wednesday night to get the product at a point where they could get it out the door. I'm not that hard of a boss, I don't think. It was their initiative. They knew they wanted to get this done by a certain time to get it into the hands of the military installation. So really, really a great job. This is an important effort and a great collaboration.
You know, I think it resonates all the way to the halls of the Pentagon, so great work.
Thank you. Thank you.
On to then item 6C, CDOT Transit Development Program. Ken.
Good morning, Ken Prather, PPACG Transportation Planner. In trying to prepare to better react to future money that may become available from whatever source, CDOT is developing lists of projects and prioritizing those projects within the state. Last couple of years, you remember they developed the Tier 1 and Tier 2 capital roads projects in their capital improvement program. This year, they're working on the transit development program, which is transit projects. It has several phases. The first is an inventory of all transit needs in the state. In our region, we've identified the projects that are in your packet. There's 82 of them. The next step will be to prioritize the bondable capital projects. CDOT is interested in both an inventory of capital and operational projects, but their first phase for this summer is to develop a prioritization of just the capital projects that are bondable, and this is anticipation of the potential ballot issue this fall, trying to be prepared that if that does come to pass and there are transit projects identified in it, that they've got a list to draw projects from that could be suggested for that ballot issue or other legislative action that might occur, or wherever the federal money may come from. This list and this process has been to the Community Advisory Committee, the Transportation Advisory Committee, and the Mobility Coordinating Committee for the last couple of months. They'll be meeting again this month to develop a recommendation of the prioritization. At this point, it's strictly just an inventory, and will be coming back to you next month for that prioritization. In their planning process, this is strictly just an exercise, a planning tool. It is not an obligation of funds. It is not a promise or a commitment of any funds. But even so, both PPACG staff and the Community Advisory Committee are concerned that they only reflect 9% of the $1.5 billion which they're using for this exercise. Only 9% would be coming or allocated to the PPACG area. Staff is proposing that we use at least 13%, that we prioritize at least 13%. That'd be $195 million. We've got 13% of the state population. Like I say, it's not a promise of money. There were some questions raised when they presented their logic at the STAC meeting last month. There'll be another STAC meeting before it comes back to the board. So we'll see what they change, but if for nothing else, we should identify and be concerned about our own priorities and be prepared to submit more than the 9%. So this will be coming back to you as an action item next month. And I'll be happy to answer any questions that you've got at this point.
Yeah, Rocky?
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. What is the explanation you're getting for the 9 versus 13 numbers?
What was the question? I'm sorry, I didn't hear.
What is the explanation that you are receiving for the 9% funding allocation versus 13% population representation?
Mr. Chair, members of the board, at the last STAC meeting, they had 5 different criteria of which they based that on, 3 of which were either population-based or reflected back to, and again, I don't remember them exactly, so I'm just trying to sort of give you the flavor of it, reflected back to the sort of system you had. The last 2 were on things like revenue miles, which makes sense, but the other was how many transfers you had to make. So when that criteria was used, that actually benefits locations that have bigger systems. And I believe when they weighted that, that particular item had like a 15% weight. So that came through from the committee. So that's how we ended up with the 9. It's based on those 5 factors and the weights for each one of them. That's why I think when Ken had mentioned that they had given us 9%, and we said, well, you know, are we really going to stick with it? Is that what our allocation is? Like, no, it's just a planning number. You can use any number you want. Well, Mama didn't raise no dummy. If they say I can use any number I want, that's why our recommendation to you is to do at least 13% or not more, because you miss 100% of the shots you don't take. So we would like to have that much longer list of projects.
Could you please, I'm sorry.
Yeah, maybe I can just answer your question, too. At the STAC meeting, that topic did come up. Pikes Peak has 12.1% of the state population, and the planning allocation for transit, 9%. Denver, on the other hand, is 57.5% of the state population, 63% of the planning allocation for dollars. The reason for the justification was they used 4 criteria, not just 1. The 4 criteria are the number of population in the area, transit and need, however you define that, existing ridership in transit, and the 4th is history of development. So those 4 criteria. Now, the argument in one stack was, how can you penalize for not having history? Because, you know, when you have a growing rider, that's the issue of a growing area, is we have no history. So you're penalizing us for not having in the past when we actually were the ones that were growing the most. So very lengthy discussion at STAC, and those are the 4. That's why maybe the difference.
Mr. Chair, if you would please just keep me informed about those ongoing conversations and your perspective on the weight, but not only the criteria, but the weighting that's being used. I'd appreciate it.
Right, yeah, there was definitely the 15% for that multi-connection weighting. That was obvious to someone who had only been in the state for a week. That would be me. That was a number that was definitely benefited Denver, and that's what sort of drove their number up. If you remove that one, that was the outlier of the data. If you remove that one, the rest of them make a lot more sense.
Well, benefiting Denver would be a new behavior, but somehow we'll figure out a way to do it.
I'm picking up on that, but yeah.
It's exactly why STAC gets a little dicey sometimes. Yes, Mark.
Thanks. Yeah, the other difference is Dr. Cog pays their lobbyists, $130,000 a year. We pay ours $15,000 a year. So I think that's impactful.
And if I might, Mr. Chair, over here.
I'm sorry, yes. Stan.
So, I'm not sure if those 4 criteria or whatever the evaluation criteria are also take into account the regions of Colorado that expect the greatest amount of growth, because that seems to me like a proactive concept about investing in infrastructure. So I presume there's other parts of Colorado that have projected rates of growth that are like ours, but ours is certainly massive. And so that seems to be like that ought to be part of the formula for evaluation, and then be part of how that drives that. So for whatever it's worth, I don't know if that's a worthwhile discussion in future
Been in policy very long, you realize that formulas sometimes, you say, oh, that's what formula says. Well, somebody put that formula there.
Yeah.
That's right. Ken.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Couple questions. One, is the bondable criteria based upon whether there's income coming in from that particular project? Is that the primary criteria for bondability?
I'm not real familiar with bondability. The example that was given by Michael Snow from CDOT, who is the spearhead for this program, this is a 20-year bond, so buying buses that are going to have a lifespan of 12 years would not be a good bondable project because you're paying interest long after the bus has been scrapped. So we're looking mostly, I think, at facility-type permanent structures that are going to have a long lifespan.
And presumably those projects would be weighted higher, if I heard correctly, if they're bondable? Some
Right
are,
now,
and
they're only asking for us to prioritize the bondable projects. They will come back later and finish up with the operational projects and things like that.
So the ones that are listed no for bondability won't even be in the discussion of prioritization?
PPACG could still identify priorities in those for its own purposes.
Okay. Well, let me just point out that Manitou Springs has an item on here for transit shuttle and surface and structured parking. And in view of our recent conversations with the COG Railway, that project is critically important to us and to the region. It's listed as non-bondable. In fact, I think we will have a source of income. I don't know if that would make a difference. It would be a long-term parking structure, and I wonder if there's some opportunity to still weigh in on this chart and perhaps provide some updated information that could go forward. The ability to perhaps have access to these funds or other funds is really critical to us and to the COG at this point. So we would love to have help as to both this particular project and what's going on here, as well as any other suggestions that anyone else may have as to how we can make that happen for the COG.
Okay. The identification of whether the projects were bondable or not was just my guess, based on my knowledge. If you think that project is bondable, we can certainly change that to yes. And what this was anticipated for primarily was for the ballot issue this fall, which is a bonding ballot issue. And so if that bonding, if transit projects are identified on the ballot itself, and that's approved this fall, then over the life of that law or ballot issue that's approved, funds from that ballot issue would go to the projects that are identified in there.
Great. Perhaps we can get with John. We've had some discussions with John. A lot of this is happening within just the last week or so for us, so I suspect that when these numbers were put together and this list was put together, we didn't have that information. So if we would have an opportunity to weigh in on that and perhaps give some update information, that would be great.
Okay.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, members of the board, I believe that, yes, this would be a bondable project, especially the building and the infrastructure, because it would have a life beyond the life of the bond. Therefore, you could put it up as collateral for the bond, and that would make sense.
We are looking at a significant structure there potentially, which would include a transportation hub, including shuttle and a variety of transportation methods. So we think that it has application for not only for us, but potentially for the region as well.
Yeah. No, this is good. Yeah, Rocky, go ahead.
Oh, just very quickly, going back to Mayor Dre's comments, which I think are very appropriate, there's an economic development leverage opportunity there, which doesn't necessarily exist with other projects. So I don't know if there's another criterion that should be considered. That's potentially a slippery slope that needs to be thought about. But I do think that we would get some a significant amount of leverage out of that project that we wouldn't necessarily get out of a typical, quote-unquote, typical project.
We agree, and we suggest you put it at the top of the list.
Well, that's exactly what a development list does. So the development, just kind of an overview here, is that we have the long-range plan at 25 years, the TIP at 4 years. In between that, 25 and 4, is this, the 10-year development list. This is not a funded list. This queues things up for staffing, for conversation, for prioritization, for data collection. That's exactly what this is for. So this discussion is exactly what should occur in every single project prior to it being considered for TIP scoring and inclusion in the TIP and funding. That's what it's for. And I should tell you, too, that Michael Snow, very open to new information. He is almost, begging information to come from local jurisdictions. So absolutely meet with Ken, and this is still a firmly flexible document.
And if I might also, in some conversations that I've had with the mayor as well, there's been some interesting notable things that have come to my mind, and we've had this conversation. This transportation hub is potentially also a ride-share place for both for people going up and down Highway 24, potentially, as we know that the density of traffic is going to go up on that road. And so when we talk about kind of CDOT infrastructure investing, ride-share developments can be perhaps beneficial for delaying perhaps a little bit. Some major infrastructure investment in 24 can be helpful in any case. It also is potentially a place for people to join forces and commute in a single car going up to Denver, because there are people on the western side of El Paso County that work in Denver. So this becomes potentially a hub for that as well. The point I bring to it is it's probably reasonable for us to be thinking about this transportation hub in Manitou Springs a little strategically and how it can support the region in several different ways. Thanks.
And just, Ken, go ahead.
Oh, Mr. Chair, I was just going to say, if you'd like some from a transportation expert, John Hazelhurst is pointing out heading to Manitou is no easy task. So if you needed a transportation expert to weigh in and attach to the list, include John's article.
I'm just going to make the point that legislation coming out of Denver, almost all of it I've seen includes a 10% share for transit. That's these projects. So if it's funded, it's in the tip, but new money comes in, you're going to look for some list somewhere. So what else do we do with this money? This is what you spend it on this list. This is how things get added. That's how it's queued up. Go ahead, John.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, the project that's on Ken's list is the 650, which I believe was the initial purchase of the building, not this much larger project. So that then we'll have to make sure we go back and we'll add that larger project, this parking facility, the $8+ million.
Right. We would have to. There's a $2.84 million project, I believe, on there.
Okay.
I don't know if that's
if that's it or not. But
we will have to amend that.
My point is, if this is in fact a different project that has not gone through a process already, as the committees are prioritizing it, we need to go back and make sure that you're comfortable with directing those committees to say, yes, you've got the projects that were on the long-range plan, you got the projects that came from the transit plan. This is something new. I believe you also have 3 other projects that had not gone through a process.
Right, and they're on that list.
So they're on that list. We'll add that as well. That would be the 4th. So we just have to have that flexibility to say, no, we're not going to be locked into those. We want to make sure that we're taking the most up-to-date projects and that they are a priority. So I think what we can tell those other committees as this project's moved through for prioritization, that there was some concurrence here that would be acceptable to sort of take those 4 projects and make sure that they're on the list where they would be appropriately placed as a priority for the region.
Mr. Chair, just one last comment. I don't know whether or exactly what would be appropriate, but to the extent that this body can help Manitou Springs and the COG bring these kinds of projects together in terms of a resolution of support, we'll be looking for all kinds of funding, whether that's state ODET funding, federal funding, and to the extent that this group can come together and say, yes, this is an important regional project, or state project, or national project, I think that would be very helpful as we move forward.
Well, that happens during the program scoring, the project scoring process. So, and then the letters of support, that would be kind of I don't think we've ever taken a position where the board of Pikes Peak Area Council of Governments takes a letter of support for a particular project. We advocate for all projects in the region, whether we want, but...
I doubt there'd be very many projects as significant, perhaps, as the rebuilding of the COG Railway. So maybe there's some opportunity there.
Maybe I-25,
perhaps.
I don't know.
I-25 might be up there as well.
Yes, Paul.
I'm sorry, I'm new to this. Would this not be an appropriate area to, as population grows and you push people further to the west as they want to enjoy and explore the interior of Colorado, up I-24 through Woodland Park is a bottleneck for transportation and for logistics. Is this an appropriate area to add a project for I-24?
Not right now, but certainly getting that project in the call for projects list would be important.
Thank you.
Yep. Andy?
Well, yeah, I mean, this is the transit part, so transit up to 24, probably not, but we have 24 on our list, on our other project list, so.
$25 million for drainage and turnoff improvements, for example, $25 million. Yep.
That's it.
That's good.
Any other comment? Okay, Mark?
So my question's for the mayor. Are you talking about the COG in itself being a transit project, or the infrastructure getting to the COG being the transit project?
Well, the COG is a transit project, as you know, to get to the top of Pikes Peak, but what we're looking at is partnering with the COG to have additional parking down in Manitou Springs or on the outskirts of Manitou Springs, and they will shuttle their riders and others into town and up to Ruxton Avenue.
So some sort of shuttle.
Correct.
I got it.
Right, and we are looking at partnering with them, similar to what they did at Seven Falls, perhaps, where they shuttle folks up as opposed to having 5,000, 6,000 cars heading up Ruxton Avenue.
Very good. Great discussion. We'll move on then to item 6D, One Ride Joint Call Center Presentation. Mr. Brian Champion. Hey. Morning, Craig.
Good morning. Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the board. Craig Blewett, Transit Services Manager with City of Colorado Springs and Director of Mountain Metro Transit. I'd just like to give a very brief introduction to the topic and to our presenter. We are presenting the launching of the new regional One Ride call center for specialized transit trips for seniors and people with disabilities. This call center has been recommended in the past 3 PPACG regional transportation plans. So it is a regional transportation service. Brian Champion will present our slides. Brian is our mobility coordinator, which is a new position that was funded by City Council's 2018 budget. He's been with Mountain Metro Transit since February and has already given his presentation to the CAC, the TAC, PPACG, as well as the Mobility Coordinating Committee, as well as the city's Citizens Transportation Advisory Board and Aging Commission. So I'd like to also recognize my colleagues in Mountain Metro who have teamed up to make the call center happen. If you could all raise your hand at this point. Thank you. I need to be brief, but I just want to call out our IT supervisor, Wendy Patterson. 13 years ago, Wendy installed Wi-Fi on the Frex buses that commuted between Colorado Springs and Denver, which was the first Wi-Fi on buses in the country. So Wendy's had lots of experience implementing IT projects similar to the call center, similar to Wi-Fi for both the city and Mountain Metro Transit. We have worked very closely and have had countless working meetings with the nonprofit service providers as well as PPACG staff over the past 3 years to make sure the call center is the best meets the needs of customers and the community. With that, I'd like to introduce Brian Champion.
Thank you, Craig, and thank you for the opportunity to present this item. In July, Mountain Metro Transit will begin operating a call center where requests for transportation will be managed, referrals and trip planning will occur, and where the community's transportation needs will be quantified. I'll walk you through how and why a consolidated call center came about and describe its benefits. Just a reminder of what Mountain Metro provides the community. Our fixed route service operates along 27 routes, providing 3 million annual trips, with an estimated 300,000 trips taken by seniors and 200,000 trips by people with disabilities. Metro Mobility is an ADA paratransit service for people unable to take fixed route. It's a demand-responsive service requiring customers to call in advance to reserve a trip. Metro Mobility operates a call center to take reservations and schedule trips. On average, Metro Mobility provides 160,000 trips annually, 11,000 of those trips using taxis. Specialized transportation is a service for seniors and people with disabilities. A larger service area and a level of care beyond that required by the ADA, as well as including senior citizens, defines the above and beyond character of this service. This is also a demand response service. Over 39,000 trips were provided last year using $800,000 in city and RTA funds. The service delivery model of specialized transportation has been in place for many years and works like this. The city contracts with 4 human service providers, HSPs, to provide specialized transportation trips. To reserve a trip, customers call HSPs directly, requiring each HSP to operate a call center. At times, customers may have to call more than one HSP to find the desired trip time. Trip cost is not a consideration in the reservation process with this model. Over the years, PPACG members and stakeholders have looked at this service delivery model and seen areas where the community could benefit from some modifications, recommending the consolidation of call center activities to lower administrative costs by minimizing duplicated services, to make it more convenient for the public to access transportation options by creating a one point of contact service, to expand services and expand the number of organizations providing services. These themes are reflected in recommendations and preferred alternatives in these planning documents. The response to these recommendations is the nexus for One Ride. This slide shows One Ride's dual functions, and I'll review these functions in later slides. Here is the specialized transportation branch of One Ride, and I'll expand on these activities and its benefits. In the short term, a centralized call center means one call, one-click access to all city and RTA-funded trips. With One Ride, we'll look at the availability at each HSP to ensure a trip closest to the customer's desired time. Another benefit is increased access to reservationists. One Ride will be open Monday through Sunday, 8 to 5, so a caller will have live answer access to a reservationist every day. We've offered to answer weekend calls going to HSPs as a service enhancement. Since we'll be reserving all city and RTA trips, we'll be able to identify opportunities to group trips, sending one bus instead of 2. We'll also be looking to lower costs by brokering trips. Brokering is simply assigning trips based on trip cost, and I'll circle back to this in the next slide. By centralizing calls, One Ride will be in a more informed position to determine if our services are meeting the community's needs, and if not, to pursue more responsive solutions. Midterm benefits will include expanding service to after hours and weekends and enlarging the service area to reach outlying areas. We'll do this by expanding the number of providers. Since One Ride will be reserving trips, this should reduce staffing needs at HSPs and translate into lower administrative costs. I've made a point to say One Ride will be reserving and assigning city and RTA-funded trips. HSPs use other funds to provide trips, Area Agency on Aging being one of the largest funding sources. HSPs have chosen to continue making these reservations, but we're hoping our success managing city and RTA trips will convince them that all call center activities, including AAA trips, should be consolidated with One Ride. Moreover, we'll be practicing what we preach. We'll be consolidating the Metro Mobility Call Center with One Ride, allowing us to shift resources from administration to operations. Each of these consolidation efforts will translate into more rides for the senior and disabled community. Brokering trips is another way we'll do more with the same funding. We asked HSPs to provide the fully burdened cost of a trip. Shown here is the cost of a 5-mile trip. Agency A will provide that trip at a cost just over $13. Since this is the lowest cost solution, we'll offer this trip to Agency A and as many other 5-mile trips they can handle. Once Agency A has reached capacity, we'll begin assigning trips to Agency C, the next lowest cost solution. But notice, 2 trips can be made with Agency A for every 1 trip with Agency C. Once Agency C's capacity is reached, we'll move on to Agency B. Here is the pricing for a 5 to 10 mile trip. Because they are the lowest cost solution, we'll assign as many trips with Agency A as possible.
Who's Agency
Right now, I'm just focusing on the prices, not the...
Well, I can't see it.
Oh, just a notional.
It's
just a notional carrier.
Yes, I'm sorry, it's the heading of the column.
Get an unnamed carrier, yeah.
So there are other considerations besides cost that might limit our flexibility: clientele, location of buses, and scheduling considerations. But cost will be our starting place. Here are the remaining trip costs. We'll be assigning as many trips as possible with Agency B for 10, 15, and 20-mile trips. This slide shows the regional transportation branch of One Ride. For residents and visitors, knowing how to get around town and who to call to get that information can be challenging. To address this challenge, we are assembling an inventory of all or nearly all transportation providers in the Pikes Peak region. With this information, we'll be able to make needs-based referrals and be stitching together individualized trip plans and coordinating trips among providers. Growing a transportation database is another important function we'll bring to the community. Being on the receiving end of questions about transportation will enable us to quantify the community's needs. Passing along that information to this board to consider as you make regional transportation decisions. Listed here are some of the programs we are interested in pursuing: a veterans-focused van pool, voluntary driver and mileage reimbursement programs, and a caller ride service to bring customers from outlying areas into our service area. We've made a lot of progress bringing One Ride to fruition. The call center facility is complete. The phone system is operational. We are working on the software interface and are consolidating a customer database. Contracts are being circulated among HSPs. During the first 3 months, we will transition the service from customers calling HSPs directly to calling One Ride directly. This will ease ourselves, HSPs, and customers through the transition period. We'll use this time to get to know our customers, build a rapport, and gain their trust. We'll also be implementing a marketing plan, which includes a direct mailer campaign, distribution of flyers at major trip generators and service organizations, presentations to senior centers and service organizations, and radio and TV spots promoting One Ride. There will be challenges to ourselves, HSPs, and our customers, but we hope our approach outlined here will address those challenges. And with that, I've concluded my presentation, but we'd be happy to answer any questions.
Turner?
So will this software be choosing the service provider, or will that be a very sharp and talented dispatcher?
A combination of both. The software will initiate a recommendation, and the reservation will confirm that reservation.
Okay. This process, how long has One Ride been in development? I mean, with the conversations when One Ride started, Craig, a decade? How long ago?
2001.
More than a decade, at least 12 years, yes.
12 years. Congratulations to getting to this point. Hooah. Thanks.
So since we have the software, does the software also, and I'm not going to say that people don't remember, but if they make a reservation, does it like do a call out or a text to remind them ahead of time that they have made a reservation?
Yes, we'll be booking the reservations. The HSP software does kick out a message the night before reminding the customer of the trip.
Great, thanks.
Sure.
Yeah, just a couple questions. What if you say to the customer, we're going to book you with provider A,
Yes.
because that's the cheapest ride, and the person says, I've never ridden with provider A, or I don't like provider A, I want to ride with provider C?
It's a good question, and we anticipate that to happen, because there may be a lot of clients that have a long history of riding with one or several HSPs. We have a policy that we will not deny anyone a trip. If we suggest a trip on an agency they're not familiar with, we'll abide by their wishes, but we'll take every opportunity to let them know the benefits of scheduling a trip on another HSP, which is greater schedule flexibility, as well as the benefits to the community.
But they wouldn't be responsible for the price difference?
They are not, no. To the customer, the trip is actually no cost.
A little.
I paid $350.
Well, I'm just asking, and then my second question is, when you were doing slide 10, you made a comment of you hope this would be better provided for visitors in the area. However, you can't just roll up to the area and get specialized transportation. There is an application process, so.
Right. Thank you for clarifying. I was referring to the regional transportation. So if someone needs to know how to get to the airport or how to get around town, since we're building that inventory of all transportation providers, public, private, we'll be able to relay that information and give them options of how they can make that trip.
So are you hiring more people to shorten up your application process? Because I know in the past when you've applied, it's been like, we'll get back to you in about up to 2 weeks. And if we're going to be going to a one call center, are we going to have more people available to shorten that process?
Let me defer to Jacob.
Yeah. So hi, I'm Jacob. I'm the ADA paratransit coordinator, and I assume that's the process you're referring to is the application process for paratransit service, and that is up to a 3-week period for the total allotment of time. It's usually 2 weeks from start to finish is a pretty accurate time period, but it's up to 3 weeks typically.
Yeah,
and in
so
terms
if
of
someone needs specialized transportation because they broke their ankle or had hip replacement or something, temporary visiting, how are we going to address that?
Visitors would already get temporary eligibility, just basic reaching out to our eligibility and letting them know that they're part of another system, and then we just got to wait for their paperwork. I literally just approved someone today, and it was about a 2-hour stretch of time. So it can take longer than that, but it's usually within a handful of days it's taken care of.
In the case of someone who needs temporary disability transportation?
On the spot, you're asking?
Jill goes hiking and she falls down on the Manitou incline and breaks both ankles, and her husband's out of town and can't take her to the doctor, so she needs somebody to get her to the doctor's appointment next week, I broke my ankle too, so we were together. And I'm just using it as an example because it is a real situation with people that, they have family members. We had people that have their cars taken out with hail last night and can't get to doctor's appointments, So how can we fast track that process when people, qualify for maybe a temporary ADA parking disability for a number of weeks or something? I don't know. I'm just throwing it out there as.
I would just like to add that one of the benefits of the, as Brian just said, is the clearinghouse information for travel. So we do have one place to call now, call One Ride, which is actually a phone number, and you can get travel information no matter what your circumstance. So if you have that circumstance, we're going to be able to provide you quicker information in terms of what your options are going to be.
Okay.
And I will just also add that it gets a little in touch with discrimination when you allow for one person and not for another person based on a disability type. The ADA is clear on you can't prioritize certain disabilities over others. But right. And typically we will try and expedite those types of things that are sudden, and we do work on that. Yeah.
Any questions, comments? Yep, Andy? Oh, I'm sorry, Yolanda? Go ahead.
I had a loss where to start. So I use Metro Mobility, and I use, what was formerly known as AmbliCab. And when I hear the presentation, it sounds great. This package wrapped in a bow, but I'm the reality of a user. And so many times when I'm calling Metro as it is, to set up a ride, I'm on hold for a long time. There are times I have a break in the council meeting, and I have to hang up because I got to get back to the council meeting during that break, after that break. So it seems like we're centralizing it, like centralized government, and it looks like to me that I'm not going to have a choice of where to ride and what would be most effective for me. I know that a lot of the agencies aren't on board with this. It is really complicated, and there's a reason it's taken 12 years, because no one sees how it's really going to work. Right now, Metro doesn't run effectively. I have an account with Metro, an e-account, and I can't even look to see what that account is, and it's been for 2 years now. I even went before City Council before. I was on City Council. I can't even see what my balance is. I mean, any other accounts on banks you would be able to see. I wonder how is that going to be accommodated, because it's like it was in beta. It's been in beta forever, and I'm like, it looks great, and it looks like something's going to happen with it, but based on results of the history, I don't see how it's going to run efficiently, and I would not want to be put. I would want to be able to select where I'm going. It's almost like it's all about the numbers and looking good, and it's not about the quality of service for people with disabilities. It's just meeting that minimum benchmark, and then that's it. So I know this is informational, but I just want everybody to have a heads up, and if you have a question about it, ask.
Anybody want to respond, or?
A couple just overall points. So we have a service that's required by the ADA law, Americans with Disabilities Act. And we are required to provide a service that's comparable to our fixed route service for people with disabilities who, because of their disability, cannot take the bus. And that's the ADA service that Councilmember Avila was just referring to. So that's our Metro Mobility service. We provide that within 3/4 of a mile of a bus route. What we're talking about today primarily is above and beyond ADA requirements. So that's where we contract with nonprofits, agencies in the community, such as Silver Key, Fountain Valley Senior Center, Community Intersections, and Amblicab now in Vida, to provide that over and above. And so that's they provide service outside the service area that we provide service, and they also provide a higher level of service inside of our service area. So our ADA service, we're not allowed to lose sight of our vehicle, so we do not go inside to help the customer go inside the home, put away groceries, prepare for their trip. But those human service providers do, those private nonprofit agencies do, and that's what we're talking about here. We currently have 4 separate contracts with those agencies, and they operate independently. And what we're trying to do here is not operate independently, but rather operate in a coordinated fashion to have as many people on a vehicle as possible. More people on a vehicle means more rides for the dollars we got, and that's going to better serve the community. It is going to be a transition, we think, as Brian said. As people who may be used to riding, say, with Silver Key, who's going to start riding with another provider as well, Fountain Valley or someone else. But that's really in the interest of our overall ability to provide service to the community.
So is there going to be a different number for, so Metro Mobility isn't included in that one number that you call for a ride?
Not immediately, starting July 1st, but we look to implement that in 2019, next year.
So that in 2019, when I call that number, I will be put on, let's say Metro Mobility is D. I will, when I call in 2019 for a ride, based on what's cheaper, even though I pay whatever, $350 for each ride, I'm going to be put on ride A because it's cheaper, when I am hooked up with Metro Mobility.
Unlikely. As you know, as an ADA rider now with Metro Mobility, for a lot of trips you have a choice of a taxi, and so we'll put you on, you'll be riding on Metro Mobility unless you take that taxi option, in which case you'll take a taxi. In the future, it's going to be it's always challenging to mix ADA rides with non-ADA rides. So we'll always have that ADA option. So when you call next year and we have one ride and you're calling one ride and you say, I'd like an ADA ride, and if you qualify for that, that's what you're going to get. But you may have some other options as well, and at that point, it would be the passenger's option to take one of those other options.
Okay, so that's really going to be needed to be out there with notice and all that. So.
Yes, absolutely.
Just to follow up, I very much respect what my fellow council member Yolanda Avila is saying. I have never been in this situation of needing a paratransit ride, so I understand her concerns, and I'm really listening. On the other hand, I know we don't fund transit like we should, and and that change is hard. And from what I'm hearing, it does sound like we're trying to do more with less and try to provide a better customer experience with the limited funding that we have. I do hear that the human service providers are struggling. Change is hard. Everybody wants to have their own way of doing things, but considering the limited dollars we have as a city and as PPACG and PPRTA to fund these human services providers, we have to, from what I can see, try to find those efficiencies. And so I appreciate what I'm hearing today, the ability to potentially reduce staffing needs, to find efficiencies by finding the best route, while also accommodating people like Yolanda to allow them to use the service provider that they've used in the past and not upset that apple cart too quickly. So I know we're still in transition, but I appreciate the information I'm hearing today. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Thank you. Yes, thank you very much, gentlemen. Okay, our next final point is added to your table this morning as you came in. That's item 6E, Pikes Peak Area Council Government Strategic Plan Process Update. Jessica.
So, good morning, everyone. Jessica McMullen. So, Andy and I are kind of going to double team this, talk about the strategic plan process. But real quick, I want to introduce you all to Jordan Moon. Jordan comes to us through the Veterans Local Government Management Fellowship Program. It's a program that's getting ready to go nationwide through ICMA in partnership with our very own Fort Carson and some of our other bases. And we're really excited to have Jordan with us. He's going to be assisting us with the strategic plan, but his military experience is really going to make him an absolutely valuable portion of our team. So if everybody wants to... This is Jordan. You should have already seen his email. You're going to see more of it. He's going to be our main touch for a lot of the strategic plan process.
Yeah, and thank you. And he's really going to take the lead on writing the draft plan based on your feedback, and we'll talk about the next steps here in just a minute. Hopefully everybody's had a chance to see the memo that went out in the addendum, the added agenda item. Just real briefly, the retreat we held, 2 weeks ago today now, we felt that was a really great session, a really good starting point. There was a lot of churning. Obviously, it took a little while to get to the right level of conversation for the board. Sometimes we were in the weeds and maybe sometimes a little too big picture, but we haven't done this before as an agency, and you haven't done this as a board for us as an agency. So I think that there's some natural uncomfortableness trying to get it right the first time up. But we thought there were a ton of great ideas that came out of that session. Appreciate all the time that everybody committed to sitting around the table for about 4 hours. We broke out kind of the outcomes into 5 categories that are in your memo, and I'm just going to run through these real briefly before I mention what the next steps are. The first category, or it's listed as an objective, is transportation, looking at our transportation needs. And I think, Commissioner Waller, this is maybe your language, not just along the I-25 corridor, but beyond the I-25 corridor, outside the urbanized area. And we heard from some of our partners in Park and Teller County, especially as we're doing some of our outreach meetings to all the jurisdictions, that they have a lot of needs out there. They partner pretty effectively with CDOT. They appreciate the support they get through the Transportation Planning Region's TPR planning process. But, you as a body could maybe lend additional support to folks where you have transportation needs in Teller County, Park County, that are outside of our metropolitan planning organization. So this is a body, since you're already together on a monthly basis, and with the committee structure, you could lend some support to those other transportation needs, identifying what those are in some of our non-urban parts of our broader region, because we're a very diverse region. So that's the first category. Second was aging, that there were things that we could do as an entity as far as improving access, awareness, education, and connectivity for our seniors so they can age in place. A lot of discussion about things like telemedicine, which gets into other issues then, like the need for broadband and better connectivity throughout our broader region, but that was a second primary category that you mentioned as well. Third one was information sharing, and this really, I think you could look at this in two different ways. One was that we as an entity could be kind of a clearinghouse for plans and studies that all the jurisdictions have been working on or have recently adopted or historically have adopted. One example that Commissioner Steen and I heard when we were in Park County, Town of Fairplay is working on a housing needs assessment. And maybe there's other jurisdictions similarly sized that have also done a housing needs assessment. Affordable housing is a big problem up in that part of Park County. So I think having kind of a library of sorts of all these different plans and studies that we as a region, that you as individual jurisdictions have worked on, could be of real value to our member jurisdictions. The flip side of the information sharing as well is that, we talked about this with the forecasting work that Jennifer provided for the 2045 transportation plan. We collect a ton of data, modeling data, GIS information goes into our land use model, into our travel model, and I think there's a tendency to kind of work in a kind of stovepipe mentality where different jurisdictions or utilities or others kind of protect their information, but there could be a greater collaboration of information sharing with all the rich data that we collect and the other jurisdictions collect, and have a better kind of sharing network of the good data sets that we all develop and maintain. Third category was advocacy, that we could develop, that you could develop a stronger voice, defined voice for common ground issues. There's been a lot of discussion about being more proactive legislatively at the state level. You could advocate for transportation or other projects of regional significance, as you see fit, but that's definitely one role that we could serve as an entity. Then the final category was collaboration, convening, that I guess PPACG's involvement in coordination, the way I view it, it kind of falls on the spectrum. We could be taking the lead on certain things because they fall right within our mission, like transportation planning and aging. We could be an advocate for certain things that are out there. We could partner with other entities. But then we could also simply be a convener. And maybe it's an issue that doesn't fall within our wheelhouse. We've talked about a lot of different examples. Homelessness is one. Commissioner Steen, I think you mentioned infill development when we had our debrief the other week. It's something that a lot of communities struggle with. We as a regional body could convene and pull together the jurisdictions and other entities we work with to really just kind of share information on issues that cross jurisdictional boundaries on those topics and many others. It's really, I think, an untapped resource and tool that we could use as an entity. It's pretty powerful where, with one phone call we can pull together 16 jurisdictions across the 3-county area, plus the state agencies we partner with and the military installations and other partners. It's really a valuable convener role that we could serve in the community. So those were the 5 main topic areas, objectives that are defined in the memo. And the next steps, as we've kind of talked about them, is to continue board buy-in and engagement with these different topics. Is, I guess the homework assignment is, if you want to self-select one of those categories that you want to meet on, we're thinking 1, possibly 2 meetings where you get together and really flesh out the details in each one of those categories in a little more detail so we know what to draft up in a draft strategic plan. And maybe it's short-term things we could focus on in that category next year to 2, also maybe out the next 5 years or so, plus also maybe looking at how we measure progress in each one of those categories. So not that you're writing the plan, Jordan's going to write it, but based on your feedback that we get in 1 or 2 sessions over the next month or so, we thought that would be a good next step. Am I leaving anything out?
You'll all get an email from either Andy, Jordan, or I that will ask you to sign up for what committees what topics you're interested in, and then those will be followed with doodle polls to try to get those meetings scheduled with the interested folks. It really is important that our board members be the ones who direct that and lead that.
I might mention also that once we develop this plan, we do plan to run it by our committees as well. CAC, RAC, TAC, for additional comments as advisors to the board to how we proceed. So, okay.
Thanks. And this is just semantics, but I just want to make sure that we're talking the same thing if we're going to be signing up for a group on one of the topics. So I would assume that the topics, the things that you have identified, are basically the goals, right? And because we've always done goals, strategies, and objectives.
And right now that language is actually unclear. That's part of why we're talking them as vision groups rather than working groups.
Okay.
We
Yeah.
need those groups to define it. Is that your vision for success? Is that your goal? Is that your objective? And so that is part of what those 1 hour-long first meetings will be.
I thought that when we convened as a group, that we defined the goals, and that these subgroups would then define the strategies and objectives for meeting those goals. I mean, I think the large collective group needs to say, these are our goals first, and then come up with strategies and objectives to meet those goals. I thought that's what we had kind of discussed, but maybe I'm wrong, but we can. I don't want to chime in.
Yeah, this is an evolutionary project. Obviously, one concept was for the board, as Commissioner Little described, is set the overall outcomes, objectives.
The goals.
The goals, the mountain peaks, and then once those peaks are set, then these subgroups would then provide actual process, the steps to get to those goal achievements. The alternative was to have these subgroups define the goals themselves. Each goal would be each area would not a goal so much, but a kind of an area of discussion, and that area of discussion then would set the goal with more specificity.
And part of why that is you'll notice that some of these don't have a measurable. Build a transportation plan for critical infrastructure. How is that different than what we do now? So that group will need to help define that as we move forward. At least that's the perspective that I've got on it.
In one of our facility here was a little bit frustrated, so we're going to get through a strategic planning for a 25-year mission among 16 member governments and 20 people who have a vote in 4 hours. Right, our military folks are saying, nah. Andy?
And this is the first crack at it, and we would suggest that we need to keep this up to date. It's going to help inform our budget and our work program process. You'll see it again as we come back in the fall, October, November, with next year's work program. And we probably ought to do regular check-ins. I mean, things are, as we've talked about earlier, things are changing so much in all the different areas that we're working in. We can't leave this as a static kind of document. So as a starting point, we think this is a really great spot. We want to get a draft to you by August at your August board meeting. Maybe it's an 80% draft and then bring it back for final adoption in September. That's kind of what we're aiming at. So it doesn't need to be where the perfect is the enemy of the good or whatever the analogy is.
Right, we very much see this as evolutionary. This is not a final project. This is a starting point. This is the path ahead without seeing too far down the road. We see letting out a kind of a dirt path rather than something laid with concrete and curbs, right? Yeah.
So, thanks. Might I recommend that maybe for beginner, for all of us, that we send out or consider looking at and seeing if we align with, like El Paso County's definitions of strategy or goals, strategies, and objectives, because that would give us a really kind of a good framework on, do we all have the same definition of what a goal, a strategy, and a objective is? So that we know where we're headed with this.
And we do.
It seems very blurry to me at the moment.
We do have several members who all have different strategic plans, and that is one of the things that we will be really looking at is, here's how everybody has defined it, here's the differences, which way are we going to be working it as PPACG?
Okay.
Yeah, and this is just a process update today, so we're way early. Turner, briefly. If you have one?
Yes, if you have one and haven't already sent it to me, please make sure that you do.
So, and we can update that plan?
Yeah.
Okay.
Any other questions quickly? So watch for the update, or if you watch for the email, chime in, and then participate. This is our plan, so be engaged. Thank you very much, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen. Okay, we'll move on into reports. Start with our military folks, and Colonel Kincaid, want to start?
All right, yes. So since the last meeting, we obviously had graduation, 984 new lieutenants launched out in the Air Force. Timing was good, weather was great. Warrior Games, wildly successful. I just want to thank the whole community for the support for Warrior Games. We had about 300-plus athletes, 600-plus family members. Great support from the local community just coming out and watching the Warrior games in addition to the military installations, and really great support from the USO and all their volunteers as well. Both of those were kind of test runs for football games, football season this year. As you know, we've got the north deck currently closed on our tri-intersection bridge, which we get a lot of traffic over, so this was kind of a good test run, both of these events, to figure out how traffic is going to look and also give us an opportunity to look at some other options as we work through some of our parking situation there. That being said, in August sometime, we'll be switching to the south deck, so the north deck will get completed, about $8 million or so of the $16 million project, and then I'll switch to the south deck, so traffic will be rerouted a little bit around there. Other big things that are going on, we did award the contract for the new visitor center on the north gate. So that was an enhanced use lease, about 37 acres for development there for the contractor, so that's going to be quite a big deal. We're also working with state of Colorado on possibly looking at how we can make that one of the visitor centers for Colorado. I know most of them are on the borders and the entryways into Colorado, but there's not a whole lot of stuff in the interior, so there's really not a whole lot of places to stop. And if you're in Colorado Springs, how do you know what to do in Colorado Springs if you're coming from all these different places and ended up here? So we're coordinating on that as well. Going to be some big work going on in the field house. We're going to award that contract in September, renovation there with some geothermal work that's going to start. And then pretty shortly we're going to award a contract for the Air Warrior Combat Memorial, which is going in at the North Gate, so you see some construction there coming in. Kettle Creek Dry Dam construction and renovation got pushed to FY20, so that's about a $25 million project that we'll be doing with a lot of coordination with CDOT. It's right there at exit 150. If you look off on the right as you're coming onto I-25 North, you see the big wall of stones. A lot of work going to be going on there to make sure that that dam is then in compliance with the state dam regulations. And then big news on the chapel will be a closure on the 1st of January 19th. So the buildup will be how do we fix our visitor experience and that kind of flow, and where do we do those things that are going to normally happen at the chapel for a 5-year period, because it'll be closed for 5 years, and it's one of the largest. It is one of the largest tourist attractions in Colorado. So how are we going to work through that? So quick update.
Thanks, Colonel. Cost on the visitor center was?
Don't have a cost right now. They're in the design phase. I don't have the overall number right now, but they're still working on how they're going to develop that area plus the actual building.
Is that all federal money or foundation money, or?
I think that's a mix.
Yeah.
I think so. What happened is when they do the enhanced use lease, basically it's, I don't want to say a land swap, but we allow them to develop, and then we get a building in return.
About the academy, they're in the process of hiring a new athletic director, and right now the project is looking like a year or 18 months. And I'm sticking my personal stuff in here, but if you have any way to encourage the academy leadership to hire Randy Spettman, who used to be the athletic director, left here and went to Utah State and then to Florida State. He was the athletic director at Florida State, and he was hired primarily to get rid of Bobby Bowden, so you can know what kind of a position he was in then. But he lives here in the community, and I'm sure that he would be very interested in the job. And so if anybody has any way to give him, the leadership, any encouragement about Randy, I think it'd be place.
Schreiber.
I'm not supposed to be messing in personnel decisions, but that just happened.
Again, Ed O'Gallagher from Schriever.
Welcome.
I don't have a elaborate report to provide like that. I do believe Colonel Grant would want me to mention with the growth that continues at Schriever that we are looking for continued support for Highway 94 improvements.
I think we're working on it. Yeah. Colonel Dominey.
Hey, good morning. Appreciate the opportunity to provide a quick update. I do have a couple of things. I'll lead off with a thanks. We had a large exercise a couple weeks back where we involved local law enforcement as well as fire and rescue. Had an active shooter scenario that we played out on base where local first responders came out and supported that. It was wildly successful, and we plan on leveraging that in the future to continue to grow those mutual support agreements and cooperation, not only with local law enforcement but also with the firefighters. So it was a great experience. A lot of learning going on both sides. So I appreciate the support on that. A couple of issues that we've got ongoing that I'll bring to everyone's attention. I think everyone's tracking the change in hours of our north gate. We are sensitive to the fact that then causes some traffic issues at our west and east gate. And it also is been brought to our attention some concerns of the businesses that are right out our north gate. We are working to mitigate that. The reason that we've changed those gate hours is due to some force protection concerns. Air Force DoD-wide is really clamping down on the risks that we take locally and wants us to address the risks that we have in our base defense. Northgate is one of our weak spots because it's a straight shot into base there. It also gets you right into our command complex with NORAD, NORTHCOM, and Air Force Space Command. So we had to change those hours to address those concerns. We're looking at mitigating the issue with some tire spikes that we put in on our outbound lanes. What that would allow us to do is to keep it open for outbound traffic because then anyone trying to come in high speed on that outbound lane would have issues. So we'll continue to look at that. We're also looking at keeping it open for pedestrian traffic, which then I think would help those local businesses as a lot of those folks out of the command section walk over to those local restaurants and whatnot for lunch and would still have access to that. So we're looking for ways to mitigate that. More to follow, but I want to let you know that we're not just closing those gates down and then moving on. We're going to look at ways to mitigate that. Additionally, we are looking to do an internal reorg that you may catch wind of. In effect, we are going to consolidate and merge the 21st Mission Support Group with the 721st Mission Support Group up at Cheyenne Mountain. Reason for that is we are trying to reinvigorate the squadron, given some Chief of Staff of the Air Force direction. In effect, you take two squadrons that are of like mission that are hurting for manpower, you collapse them together and build a single whole squadron that then can get after the mission a little more effectively. So up at Cheyenne Mountain, we have a security forces, we have a CE, and we have a comm squadron that we're going to collapse in on 21st Comm Squadron, 21st CE, 21st Security Forces. And what that'll do is make whole squadrons that then we will be able to leverage to get after the mission a little more effectively, not only at Peterson but also up at Cheyenne Mountain. In effect, what we can do is we can re-roll assets if we have, in the CE front, if we have an electrical issue up at Cheyenne Mountain, we will be able to bring to bear all of the electricians that support 21st Space Wing on that effort and get after it. So key factor for this forum is that there is no net reduction in manpower. The manpower has been granted to us to just reinvest, so there is no employment impact on the local community, as some folks have been worried that there'll be a reduction in manpower, and that's not the case. I'll also mention next update to Fountain City Council is coming up on the 26th of June as we continue to work our transparency on our PFOS, PFOA efforts, so that it will be coming up the evening of the 26th. I'll also kind of pile on with Schriever with regards to Highway 94. We share the concern as we have airmen that reside in town and at Peterson that work out at Schriever, as well as some folks that work on Peterson that live at Schriever. So we're looking to any way that we can help mitigate the traffic concerns on 94 would be welcome. Finally, I'll end with another thanks. This will be my final PPACG, as the Air Force has seen fit to move me on, and as much as my family hates leaving this town, duty calls. So we'll be leaving here in the next month. But I want to say thanks to this body on behalf of the airmen of Peterson Air Force Base. Not only those that live here currently, but also those that are deployed and are remote. So right now we have 62 airmen out of 21st Space Wing and about 129 out of Peterson proper, deployed downrange, engaged in the fight against ISIS and the Taliban in Afghanistan. Their families are here. And I'll tell you that there's nothing that would distract me from the mission when I'm deployed than worried about where my family's at. The fact that they are here in the Colorado Springs area gives great comfort to those that are deployed downrange. In addition, we have several remote sites where military members go without families: Thule, Greenland, Clear, Alaska, as well as Cavalier in the uppermost portion of North Dakota. And oftentimes, those airmen leave their families here. Why would they leave them here? Because of the support they get. So on behalf of those airmen, I want to thank this community and all the members that are represented here. And from me personally, the relationships and the collaboration and the cooperation that I've experienced here is second to none. And I appreciate over the last 3 years the opportunity to be part of this community and to partner with each and every one of you as we get after the needs of our constituents. So I appreciate the opportunity. Thank you very much. I'm going to Virginia. I'm going back to my alma mater to be the ROTC debt commander and bring on the next generation of officer. So I will be a kindred spirit with the academy here as we make sure that we build officers that are worthy of serving this great nation. So appreciate it. Subject to your questions.
Mayor?
Yes, start with Colonel Dormany. Thank you for your service. And your contribution to this group has been very, very valuable. Active shooting incidents concern us all, and wildly successful in terms of response to that is a term we don't hear very often. My point is, how can we collaborate better with you all, things that you have learned in our own communities to help plan for the future?
So specifically to the active shooter and law enforcement, we have a monthly law enforcement collaborative breakfast that we call together. El Paso County Sheriff, Colorado Springs Police Department, Teller County Sheriff. The entire community falls in on a breakfast. You put food involved, and of course, law enforcement wants to be there. But we have a once a month we get together and have a discussion of what is going on in the community, what is going on base, and what do we need to do better. And that is again a great opportunity just to build relationships and share those lessons learned. As we look to the future of those exercises, I think that is critical as well, and we are more than interested in supporting a similar exercise that is a downtown venue, whether that is, God forbid, a high school scenario that we see too often in the news, maybe during the summer months where school is not in session, and we would be able to support that, an incident on base. Again, we are interested in leveraging those lessons learned, and we sat down and shared those lessons with the SWAT team that responded, and I can only assume that those are going to be incorporated, and the next time we execute, we will be all the better for it. So specifically for those instances, I think we've got a good way ahead and good form to do that. As far as the other community opportunities, we are blessed to have multiple forums in which we do that. Here specifically with the area chiefs of staff, where we get together and talk about what our issues are, what are the upcoming events, and then keep the dialogue open. I point to the JLIS as well. Again, it's not necessarily about the product. Military saying is that the plan is interesting, but planning is everything. And the idea that we get together when we plan those things is a huge benefit. So I think we're doing all the right things, and I look for additional opportunities to leverage for that end.
Thanks for your leadership.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think I echo that for the full board. Thank you for your service to the area. Absolutely.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Sharon, do you have a comment?
Yes, thank you also. We've had a rough 30 months, but thankfully next week, for the first time in 30 months, Fountain is turning on the wells, and all the tests show that we have the PFC, PFOA well below negligible levels. So thank you very much for being part of that and hanging in there and working with us.
Excellent. I look forward to actually joining you for that event, so I'll be down there in person to participate.
Well, invite me, because I haven't been invited. So. I just got told they're turning them on. So.
All right, go to Fort Carson, Hal.
Yeah, thanks. Good morning, and I'll be brief, but there are a couple things I wanted to mention. First, I know it's already been announced, and you're probably all very well tracking, but we do have a new unit coming to Fort Carson, the Security Force Assistance Brigade, about 800 senior level, mid-level folks forming here in January 2019. Got some facilities identified on post and are hard working at trying to update those so we can take that force on. The second one I wanted to mention is the conversion of the Infantry Brigade Combat Team to the Armor Brigade Combat Team. The Army has yet to make a decision on that. I know they're getting close. They asked for a little bit more data the other day. So hopefully that'll all turn in our favor, and we appreciate everyone's support in trying to make sure that we retain that particular brigade at Fort Carson. 4th Cab, they're deploying now. The commander left, I think, 2 days ago on a flight out of the ADAG at the south end of the Colorado Springs Airport. Continue to support that. There'll be a number of flights continuing to leave as the Combat Aviation Brigade deploys. Just to comment on the weather this morning, I suspect several of you were woken up early in the morning with some of the hard weather we had. I'll tell you, at Fort Carson, we're still assessing, but one of the challenges I have as your Public Works Director down there is most of our vehicle fleet was damaged to the point that it's not drivable. So trying to get our team out and around and work on damage down there has been a problem starting early this morning. Looks like a lot of roof damage, certainly a lot of windshields broken that were in that area, and I know the damage is the same out in Fountain and Security area. So we'll have a fairly significant bill to fix some of our damage down there. It's going to take some time, but you'll learn more about that, I suspect, as we make better assessments. Last thing, we have a change of command. On the 6th of July, the garrison commander, Colonel Rod Fitch, will be leaving with Sergeant Major Burton, and we have 2 new incoming. So if you haven't gotten an invite, let me know, but I think that information's gone out from our public affairs, and certainly you're all invited, so hopefully you can make it. That's all I have. 6th July. It's in the morning. I tried to look at my calendar. I think it's 10 o'clock, yeah.
There was a Military Affairs Council meeting this morning, and they had the chairman of the Pike Speaker Bus Rodeo come and speak, and I just wanted to reemphasize that every night and every session at the rodeo is to support one of the military installations. And I don't have the exact nights or which, but every one of the sessions supports one of the military organizations, and that's a significant contribution that the community makes to the military. And the street breakfast, Fort Carson and the range riders are the ones that coordinate that, and they I'm sure everybody here has been to the street breakfast, but you should consider going again.
June 26th and 9th.
Very good. Okay, we'll move on then to Mobility Coordinating Committee. Some more committee reports. Joe?
Joe Urban with the AAA. Gail could not be here today, and I think the information that you need is in your packet relative to the report. If anybody has any questions, I'd be happy to field those.
Mobility, no? Okay, thank you, Joe. Move on to Transportation Advisory Committee. Brian Vitulli.
Good morning. Brian Vituli, City of Colorado Springs, Mountain Metro Transit, with your monthly report. The report is in the packet. For the month of May, we only had one action item, and that was to recommend approval of the membership appointment for City of Manitou Springs, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Looking for any, do you have any vacancies to fill from any member governments, do you know?
Not at this time.
Okay.
Yeah, with Manitou rearranging their representation, we're
Yep.
good.
Good. Thank you for your service, Brian, and the
Thank you.
committee. Okay.
Thank you.
Community Advisory Committee.
Jessica had to leave early. I don't think there's a report in your
I've got
packet. Oh, I'm sorry.
There
There
is.
is that one.
Ken Brather, PPACG Transportation. Sharon Brown, the second vice chair of the CAC, was scheduled to be here, but she's home with a repairman right now for the damage that she got last night in the hailstorm. She wanted me to emphasize CAC's concern, deep concern, about the 9% planning factor that CDOT is proposing for its transit development plan. There was a long discussion at CAC about fair share and the shortage for the PPACG region.
Okay. Andy, we should probably talk about how we can influence that at CDOT as a region at STAC. Maybe some queue up with staff ahead of time would help. But that's come up a couple times this morning, that 9% share. John?
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, I'm not sure if it's
Come on up.
appropriate or the reports or not, but my understanding is that 9% came from a subcommittee that was made up of other folks. So I just want to be careful that it's not CDOT necessarily, it's CDOT rather taking that recommendation that came from other planning organizations around the state. So
I think it came from DTD, Director of Transportation Development at CDOT, I think, but I don't know.
it's the committee, right. So
Which
we need to work with some of our other MPOs and COGs and
Okay.
PRTs.
TPRs.
TPRs. I was not even close.
You're get the right numbers.
But I'm picking it up. But again, I just wanted to make sure that we make sure that we understand who we need to lobby, who we need, no, well, not lobby, we don't lobby federal people,
No.
but who we need to chat with. It's not necessarily the CDOT, but the CDOT's running the process, and it's our other organizations that have come up with that. So we need to make sure that we
Maybe you can
we
help
focus
us
our.
identify who that target audience is.
I'm happy to do that. And
All
again,
right.
I apologize.
All
I'm
right.
not sure if this is appropriate
Got
for
it.
reports. I just wanted to
Sure.
make sure that
Mr.
we
Chair.
aimed correctly.
With regard to that, it's just some of us commissioners on the Board of County Commissioners for El Paso County have seen other funding allocation formulas that have not necessarily, I'm not trying to say fair or not fair, but they were not necessarily properly balanced, let's say. So having had that past experience, I think it would be worthwhile for this committee, this board, to take a look at that formula and see if we consider it, to be a fair from our perspective, and just basically do an evaluation of it. If you've done it already, I'd be interested in hearing your findings, but if we haven't done it, I think we should go through that process, because really, if we go through that formula evaluation, and in the end we say, it looks good, they've taken everything properly into consideration, then we've got an understanding about what our action may or may not be. But if we think it's not fair, that becomes now a cause for action that we can take forward and make recommendations on the changes to the formula.
So at STAC, the most vocal MPO was the North Front Range MPO, not us. I mean, we made our point, but the representative for the North Front Range, which is, Greeley areas, were very vocal. Commissioner Kirkmeyer.
Yeah, and we'll hunt down what we can between now and the next meeting, but we'll schedule this for an information update at the July meeting. Good.
All right, and again, all those things are always subjective. Do you go by population? Do you go by lane miles? Do you do this? So it's not as simple as taking one and bringing it to you. We would be doing you a disservice. If we're going to do it, we need to make sure we look at a multitude of the factors and then bring them to you, so then you can decide what it is. But again, it's going to be subjective. So you as a committee might decide something that isn't necessarily going to jive what's going on at the state, but we'll certainly put that together.
Yep, okay, thank you very much. Okay, we'll move on then to Regional Advisory Committee. Back to Joe.
Dave Bessler could not be here today. I believe he's maybe off the coast of Alaska in a ship, so don't feel sorry for him. The only item I want to note is we want to thank the folks of Park County, and in particular the City of Guffey, for hosting our meeting last month. It was great to get out into that area. and they were wonderful hosts, and we got the opportunity to look at that budget and get that approved and see some pretty country at the same time. Any questions?
Water quality management.
Just real briefly, I'll handle that one. The Water Quality Management Committee met for the first time earlier this month, first time in about a year and a half. I guess it was in May. And they recommended a few of the site applications that were on your consent agenda today. But we're going to keep that group together. They've got representation from all the jurisdictions, water, wastewater providers. We're just about to get started with an update to the area-wide water quality management plan, the 208 plan, if you will, beginning in August. So we'll give continued updates on that, but we'll make sure that all the jurisdictions are engaged and involved in that process.
Great, thank you. We want to see that update. Mr. John Hall, welcome.
Mr. Chair, board members, thank you very much. Cognizant of the time, I'll try to be just brief and let it be open to you guys to ask me as many questions as possible on topic number 2, I think, in particular. Topic number 1, just Mark, Andrew, and Karen aren't here, so they gave me a couple notes of some brief things on Region 2 North program to discuss, and I got some backup from Dave behind me who can hopefully correct me if I say anything wrong. But so 3 recent projects awarded, the US 24 31st Street and Ridge Road, those improvements, intersection improvements there, US 24 Montessori Wall, which will actually begin construction later in the fall, and the US 24 Rockfall mitigation project that we discussed earlier to mitigate some of those issues also on 24. There will also be a project probably advertising this month for fiber optic cable along US 24 as well. So there's some efforts that we're doing to stagger those projects, like that fiber optic project, also probably beginning work after Labor Day because of obviously 4 projects there on 24 west of I-25. Also, 94 was mentioned, and I don't have a lot of details on it, but I know that some funding, Shane Ferguson's going to be the RE, and there is a study, operational study. I believe it's about $200,000 designated for that to start doing some traffic and safety operation studies on 94 on the east side of town going forward. Obviously, that'll become whatever it becomes, from a full-blown EA in the future if there's added capacity needed, or if it identifies simpler safety projects that could be authorized through a CADX, categorical exclusion environmental process, then so be it, and hopefully that'll get good results. So I-25 South Gap, we've had a number of really key milestones in the last month, among them SB1 passing, which gives us some options on funding, and really the most important one is that announcement by a federal DOT that the infra grant, $65 million, the project was awarded that. So we're going to be really moving into, that really triggers us to get Package 1 construction. And the purpose for Package 1, really above and beyond anything else, is to just get going. We're leveraging the CMGC process, having that contractor on board and part of the design, so that, hey, as sooner we can put a shovel in the ground, that much more work gets done, and it gets us closer to that end date. That first project is really based on the simplest area to do. It's up around Castle Rock, about that 4 miles south of Castle Rock down to about Toma Road, that exit, that north to where the concrete begins on the south side of Castle Rock, just south of Plum Creek. That's what we're targeting. Right now, our Transportation Commission this month will be reviewing and hopefully approving a application for $92 million for that first package. And what we've done is we've asked for it as SB1 funding because of, I don't know the details on SB 267, but hey, it's a great opportunity. There's the funding that's available, and let's use it. So that's a really exciting part of the puzzle. Right along with that, Dr. Cog will be, because that's in their area, they'll be amending their tip to cover that change to the SB1 funding. We expect that to be done at their July 18th and July 19th board, and we should be rolling, hopefully, if we can keep everything on track, right into actually contracting with Kramer and being under construction in August.
Do you know where that $65 million, who it's awarded to?
I have a the way I understand, the best thing I should say is that I got the task to work with Jennifer and find out exactly all the nuances of the agreements and all that needs to occur with. But it's certainly, it's going to be an IGA with El Paso County and with the DOT.
Yeah. Go ahead, Mark. Sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And just to kind of let everybody know, we have not actually received official notification from U.S. DOT yet as to the award of this grant. So, I know there are a lot of rumors floating around out there about, you got to accept it within 24 hours of notification. You have to accept it as is. To this point, we have nothing from the U.S. Department of Transportation. The only thing we've seen in the county are the same news releases that everybody else has seen, and a 2-sentence email from CDOT. That's all we have thus far.
And if I might also, I think there is in that process a 60-day notification to Congress. I think U.S. Department of Transportation has their list. They have published it, but my guess is that 60-day notification has to complete before we start receiving the documentation and so forth that gets the negotiations going for what compliance means and so forth. But if you know differently, I'd be interested in hearing that. But that's kind of my speculation on why we haven't gotten any documentation yet.
I most certainly don't, but I'm hoping, I don't think I'm hearing anything that's really right on. I think that's right on. And I think that's why we as CDOT certainly aren't thinking of relying on that funding here in Package 1. We're moving forward to get Package 1 under construction. And that, Commissioner, you give me a great segue into the Package 2 is really that next thing. So here in July, I think in the next 30 days or so, we're going to get a lot more resolution and answers on those questions. I know I personally will be looking into it and working with our contracts unit and with FHWA to lock down those details. But there in July is really when the crux of it. We should have those answers, and we're going to be moving forward with all the intergovernmental agreements for all the remaining funding, with the goal of having that funding in place for Package 2, which we'd like to be in the same kind of window that we're in right now. We're doing the final design, on middle of July, in about 30 days, we're getting Package 1 contracting finalized, about another 30 days to really sign all those contracts and under construction. We expect to be in that same window probably around November of this year, so that would be the goal. And one of the tasks our executive director has given me is to actually lay out a schedule for the financials, for the funding and stuff. So I'll be working on that in the next 30 days or so as well, and maybe I'll come back and brief you guys directly or whatever on that. But certainly I'll be working with Jennifer and all on the details of that.
Mr. Chair, I do have one other question.
Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. So, despite our differences with the tolling, I do want to continue to express our thanks to CDOT for the acceleration of the project and the other things that you're doing on this project. I am grateful to that, and I just want to make sure you know that. But also, there is a project on Highway 24 at the Cascade area. This is to try to mitigate some of the traffic issues with regard to the closure of the Cog Railway and the increased traffic that is expected now on the Pikes Peak Highway. And we did have a town hall meeting with the residents up there. CDOT was present, and I'm just interested in perhaps getting a regular update on that from all parties concerned in this meeting. Until that's done. It's minor work, but I think it's very important work. And if you have an update to that right now, 30 seconds, I'd appreciate it. But if not, we can work on it for the next meeting.
The main update, that isn't a city project, to my understanding.
No, well, there's CDOT work, there's county work, and there's city work, county work, and CDOT work going on there.
Thanks, John. Dave Watt, fellow resident engineer with the program along with John. We've been meeting on a weekly basis before the public meeting and since the public meeting with Kathleen, with Jennifer. Continue to do that. It looks like there's going to be expansion of the number of lanes going into Pikes Peak Highway, if you will, Fountain Avenue. So that's looking at an expansion there. Some channelization improvements at the frontage road in the intersection. The extension of the left turn lane that enters Fountain Avenue from westbound US 24, and some signal work. But we'll be back next month and give you an update on that, about hopefully what the results of those improvements are, that they'll be in the ground by then.
Excellent.
And an encouraging note, this also has a lot of attention of not only of law enforcement from El Paso County Sheriff's Office, but the Carl State Patrol is very attuned to what was occurring last summer, and all heard those voices that were at the public meeting approximately a week or two ago. I know you spoke there, Commissioner. And there's a lot of attention being given to this. And to me, the best improvement's going to be the 3 toll booths up on the Pikes Peak, entering the Pikes Peak Highway, versus the one from last summer. So we're hoping to clear those people out in a better fashion. But yes, we'll be back next month. We'll continue the discussions with your staff as well.
Thank you very much.
And the only other last thing I'd like to just make sure to emphasize, too, is that our project is, obviously as we go into final design, we're realizing some cost, issue type things. We're finding that the median earthwork, 12 feet down, there's a clay layer. We want to make sure that we design a road that's it's going to last. It's not going to need to be repaired in 10 years. But we can, and that process to fix that, for example, could take a full 6 months of surcharging the median. But we continue to be pushing the schedule. We continue, as we analyze those things, to be in budget on the 3, and even to the point that we really are starting to reevaluate those 2 structures, County Line, Palmer Ridge, and Skyview Toma. Can we get those in budget by having an efficient project, by looking at cost savings, or just by being in budget? I mean, can we get those elements in? 2, auxiliary lanes on southbound, either as you're, right at Monument Hill or, further up around Larkspur. So those are the elements now that we're really starting to look at in package 2 and 3 to maximize the scope, if you will, but I mean, within that $350 million budget, maximize the benefit we provide the traveling public.
Okay. And just a quick recap, if you had for the GAP project, the general timing from start to general finish, and what impact would be on traffic during that window?
So my text for CAC and TAC also, mentioned, I'm rereading my text that I provided to Rick Sonnenberg, with implementation of everything by summer 2021. And I want to de-emphasize, implementation of the express lanes or whatever. We want to have traffic opened up in 2021, but we're not under a gun for bonding revenue and stuff like that. We want to have this, done in 2021, and then there is a process, right, to test the express lanes and stuff like that. I don't know if that's going to be summer 2021 that we're really flipping that switch on, but we want it constructed here in late 2018, 2019, 2020 are the major construction, finishing off as early as possible in 2021 with the major infrastructure, and then implementing the express lanes also that year.
And you did make clear at our meeting last week that we do expect to have both lanes open at reduced speeds, perhaps from 75 down to 60 miles an hour, but with somewhat narrowing lanes.
Looks like 60 miles per hour is what we're probably going to be using.
So no lane closures, but there will be restricted speeds, likely.
Yeah, well, overnight lane closure certainly, but 2 lanes open, any sort of peak hour, daytime operation. We're trying to phase this and to include maximized, 8-foot shoulders even during construction, so we're not pinching down where you're 2 feet on each side. We're trying to avoid that as much as possible.
Okay. Turner?
Yes, I'm wondering why, you're starting up at Castle Rock, when we, refer to it as a gap. I think of, right when you leave Colorado Springs and you go to Monument, that first little bit there, you just next down there to 2 lanes, and I'm thinking of, the traffic gets so thick right there, and once you get back up to 3 lanes, really moves. And I'm wondering why you're not doing that part first, and especially when they came to Perta and they asked for, for us to kick in money for this project as well, for the part that was within El Paso County. And they actually came to our representative from PPACG came to our board and asked for us to vote for this, and so I'm wondering why we aren't going to see immediate traffic relief in this end of El Paso County.
Well, really, the project is going to provide the relief nearly the same time during all phases. we need to get going on some construction. And the quickest place that we can get going, there aren't bridges, there are not, major structures, there's not, it is that stretch of 4 miles. That really will not be done and opened up until late 2020 probably anyways, even where we're starting initially there in the Castle Rock. And we're not talking about being a year or two behind starting, that package 2 is going to be Monument, Hill, north and south, carrying that down to about Greenland. That's going to include 3 major structures, so 2 wildlife crossings, the reconstruction of the Greenland interchange, also all the tie-in widening to the center. So it's really just a pure matter of timing and getting us breaking ground in the most efficient area we can. That takes a little more design effort, all those structures, a little more effort in analyzing the phasing and all that to finalize that design. But again, we're talking about by the end of this year being under contract on that as well. So that's the goal. So we're not talking about, Paso County can wait, to a year or two. No, that's not at all it.
Thank you, John.
Very good. Rocky, quickly.
Just a quick comment. We talked about this steering committee last week. It was December of 2016 when this body first approved the notion that I-25 gap should be a priority. The construction could very well start within 18 months, or within 20 months, I guess, if you're calling it August, of that date. $350 million project on an interstate highway, absolutely remarkable. I mean, and almost unheard of. Nobody wants to think that we could do everything that way because that stretches our resources very, very thin. But compliments to CDOT staff. You guys have been absolutely amazing, and you've just plowed on through a very, very difficult, very complex process, and the traveling public will benefit as a result. So thanks for your work.
Good.
And if I may just add one thing, too. In July, with all those IGAs, I assume we're coming back to this body, too, and having probably some tweaks or whatever needs to happen with both the long-range plan and the TIP to just make sure we have all the boxes checked to get funding budgeted. Thank you.
In the interest of time, just on the stack item, just watch for initiatives 152, 153, and 167 in the fall. Those are the 3 initiatives that would be considered for additional highway funding. That was the primary focus of our stack meeting. So in the interest of time, we'll move on then to the Executive Director's report, 7I.
Interest of time, you've got my report in the packet. We're thrilled to have John Leosatis join us. I'm sure you've met him by now. He's hit the ground running. Yes, thank you.
Quickly, any member entity announcements? All right, very good. My apologies for a 3-hour meeting with no breaks. I've been right in already once, and thank you very much, Commissioner. But definitely not my intent. 2 hours is about the most that their back end can endure. But so thank you for forbearance today. Colonel, thank you again for your service to Pikes Peak region, and wish you all the best in your move. Next meeting is July 11th, 9 a.m. Gentlemen, we are adjourned.
I
didn't expect it to be this long.
Quiet. My mouth shut. You didn't try to move things along. You did good. Yeah, you did good. But let me point out a few guys you need to talk to. Yeah, I don't think you need to point them out. Okay, how's that?
That's good. What are you going to do, right?
I know. What are you going to do?
Good meeting, Norm.
All right. Thanks, Bill. So you have a candidate? You have a. Special
shouldn't talk so much.
I know.
Well, I gotta
thank the colonel.
God, and Turner?